Okay, the chair calls this libertarian seminar to order. Tonight's opener is going to be David Ramsay Steele discussing Freud and Candace Owens, and I can't remember the precise way the email described it, so I'll have to rely on you to kind of fill that in. Just a couple reminders: if you have any noise-making devices, turn the noise-making devices down, and let's keep it respectful. So go ahead, David.
I've got to keep it respectful.
Well, you don't, because you're the supreme leader, but everybody else does.
Yeah. All right. Okay, so I'm a huge fan of Candace Owens. I think she's spearheading a revolution in investigative journalism. And I thoroughly approve, for instance, of what she's doing with Erica Kirk, the Merry Widow, right now. And generally speaking, I think when she does that, she's on pretty safe ground, because she doesn't come up with the conclusion. She just asks questions, and the conclusion may eventually emerge. Where she is often wrong, in my view, is when she's talking about grand conspiracies, usually headed by Jews, which are part of the traditional conservative Catholicism. She comes up with, she is a recent Catholic convert, and she comes up with these things that the Catholic Church was saying about 100 years ago. And I sort of half expect her to say, you know, because I have to, every day I have to get my daily dose of Candace, and I half expect that one day she's going to open with, Dreyfus was guilty, which I would be appalled by that, but I wouldn't be astounded, the way she talks about some of these great earth-moving, earth-shaking developments. So many of the things that where she does that treatment, which I don't like, and which I think she completely overreaches, are things I know very little about. And that wouldn't stop me necessarily from doing some research and criticizing her. But she has recently taken to saying things about Sigmund Freud, which I do know a little bit about, and where I know that she's really seriously wrong. So, the main message of what I'm going to say is why Candace Owens is wrong about Sigmund Freud. Let me just introduce at a sort of 30,000 feet sort of level, looking down on this, and give you, in other words, a very broad outline. There are, if you ask who was Sigmund Freud, what's his importance? What did he achieve? How should we evaluate him? I think there are three answers. There may be others, but there are at least three answers. First of all, there is the answer given by what we can call the Freud legend. And this is institutionalized Freudism, or what we might call the Freudian Church. Then there is, secondly, there is an attack on part of the Freud legend by a man called Jeffrey Masson, who wrote a book published in 1984 called The Assault on Truth, which takes a certain very critical view of Freud in one respect. And thirdly, there is the story about Freud, which I'm going to tell, and which is not due originally to me in any respect. It's due to a whole bunch of researchers, including Frank Cioffi, Alan Esterson, Malcolm Macmillan, and Frederick Cruz. They would be among the leading researchers and writers who have taken this other line on Freud, which I agree with, and which I'm going to explain and defend. First of all, two facts which are undisputed by anyone. In the year 1886, 1896. In the year 1896, Freud started proposing a theory which he referred to as the seduction theory. We would call it the child molestation or abuse theory, but Freud called it seduction. And this theory was that the cause of mental illness is kids who were sexually seduced by their fathers when they were very young. That's to say, the outline would be the ages of 2 through 6, but 6 would be very late. Basically, we're talking about kids in their 3rd, 4th, and 5th years of age, who, when they're adults, they recall something that happened to them, or they're affected by something that happened to them when they were 3 or 4 or 5 years old, and that was that their fathers had sexual relations with them. So that's what that is referred to, because this is the way Freud referred to it, as the seduction theory. And Freud proposed that theory and wrote stuff arguing for that theory in 1896 and 1897. So this is agreed by everybody. And then at the end of 1897, or maybe sometime in 1898, Freud abandoned that theory and replaced it with a different one. And the different one was that these people who came into his practice and were being treated by him, they hadn't been seduced by their fathers when they were in infancy, but when they were in infancy, they had imagined that they had had sex with their fathers. Right? So this is the new theory that Freud came to by 1898. And that's the foundation of what we call psychoanalysis, which is Freud's system of thought. And that's a crucial thing. Now, I don't want to spend too much time on this, we'll come back to it, but when I say they imagined it, you have to understand something about Freud's very strange theory of the unconscious. According to Freud, there is this unconscious, and the unconscious is not something you're aware of. So if I say you imagine something, you're liable to think, oh, you know, I had a fantasy about that, I thought about that. But this is not what Freud was saying. He was saying that in their unconscious is recorded a memory of them fantasizing that their fathers had had sex with them. But it's not something they're aware of, because according to Freud, no one's aware of what's going on in their unconscious. So why does it matter? It matters because the unconscious plays tricks with you and screws up your life, causes problems for you. And the unconscious is, you cannot find out what's in your unconscious by any obvious or simple method. So you don't know what's in your unconscious. So this is Freud's theory. But it's there nonetheless, and it's doing things to get at you and disturb your thoughts and emotions. And what it does, because the conscious is censoring the unconscious, and this is all Freud, it has to disguise itself. So the signals that the unconscious sends to you and the way that it messes up your life is not the flat truth of what it's on about, but it's a disguised form. And in fact, the unconscious, in Freud's account, is fiendishly clever at disguising what it's talking about to you, right? This sounds incredible, and I think it is incredible, literally. I don't credit it at all. But anyway, this is what you have to understand. So this is what went on. So let me now say what the three stories of Freud will tell you. The Freud legend, the official Freud story, which for many years was put forward by institutes of psychoanalysis, as they call themselves, and there was one in every major city in the Western world, and many of them still survive. I checked, the Institute of Psychoanalysis in Chicago is still there. How it might have changed since the time when it would, like the 30s, 40s, and 50s, when it would have been at its height and really a tremendously powerful ideological force, is something I haven't gone into. In other words, I didn't follow up on the site to see how true they were to old-fashioned Freudism, but they're still there, and they undoubtedly, like you can say, they would at least say that Freud was one of the greatest minds of all time, and he discovered things that had never been known before, and all that kind of thing. So the story of the seduction theory and the abandonment of the seduction theory that would be told by this Freud legend or official Freud story would be that Freud's patients told him that they had been seduced by their fathers, and Freud at first believed them, and that was why he put forward the seduction theory in 1896. But then he realized, after thinking about it and analyzing it carefully, and this is part of the Freud legend, right? So Freud's very self-critical, very conscientious, and very truthful. And so he concluded that they had not been seduced by their fathers, although they told him that, but they had imagined this, right? So that's what the official Freud legend will tell you. So the Masson account is that, first of all, Masson accepts that these kids, these adult patients who were remembering their childhood, in childhood, Masson accepts they actually had been molested by their fathers. And that's why Freud, in 1896, said that they'd been molested by their fathers, right? But Masson then says Freud, out of cowardice, realized that he was facing too much hostility. So he decided to abandon the truth and come up with this theory that they had concocted in their unconscious a false story about being molested by their fathers, right? So that's what the official Freud's theory would say, the legend, and then that's what Masson says. And by the way, Candace completely accepts everything Masson says. And she ties it in with this thing that this whole Catholic, old-fashioned Catholic idea that Jews have been masterminding child abuse down the ages. In fact, Candace, this story, which was very popular in Europe like 150 years ago or 200 years ago, it's actually much more harsh against the Freemasons than the Jews. But, of course, the Freemasons today, you don't hear anything from them if someone says something bad about them. With Jews, it's a bit different, right? So this is Candace. But anyway, she fits this Masson theory into her ancient Catholic, I hesitate to call it anti-Semitism, but anti-Jewishness, right? So that's Candace. And every time she frequently now mentions Sigmund Freud, and whenever she does, she mentions this book by Masson. She says that it's completely true, and you must read it. and you'll find out that and then you'll find out that Masson is correct. Freud discovered the truth, which is that father rape of their children, is very common, but Freud decided to cover this up, and because he didn't have the courage to face the outcry that his allegations received. Now, the true story, the third option, which is what I'm going to say, is, and this may surprise you if you didn't know anything about this before, is that Freud's patients never told him that they had been seduced or molested by the father. Never. Now you might wonder, you might think there's something very strange here. Nonetheless, that's what I'm going to maintain, that Freud never was told by his patients that that they had in infancy been seduced or raped or molested or abused by their fathers. Never happened. This is not to say it never does happen, just that the occasions when Freud said it happened, it didn't happen. So you might wonder how that's possible given everything else, but it is possible. So let's back up a bit. So Freud was born in the Austro-Hungarian Empire. He was born in what we now call in English Moravia, which is now part of the Czech Republic. He was born in a town which the German name for it is Freiberg, and the Czech name, I'm going to take a stab, is something like Pribor. I don't know how close I am. But, and now, of course, it's only called by its Czech name. And one of the things I found just when I was looking at this is that I'm surprised, actually, to find this, that in many cases where that happened in Central Europe, we don't actually know. You know, scientists who've researched it don't actually know whether the German name or the Czech name, and this applies to other non-Czech groups as well, which came first. But anyway, that's what they say. But at the age of 3, Freud's parents, with Freud, of course, moved to Vienna. Vienna is the capital city of Austria and was then the capital city of this great empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire or the Habsburg Empire. His family was a comparatively poor Jewish family. There were lots of Jews in Vienna, and some of them had been there for generations and were thoroughly Germanized in their language and culture. But then there were these people coming in from the provinces who had some rustic habits and so on. And the more cultivated Jews were eager to distance themselves from these less cultivated, or in other words, less Germanized Jews, more rural Jews. And so there's a certain tension there. And of course, Freud's family had just come, they come after Freud's birth to Vienna. But Freud was always a very proper Germanized Jew, right? And when he became a practicing physician, all his friends and associates were Jews. There were a lot of Jews in Vienna, and all his patients were Jews as well. Something I only realized comparatively recently, because it's never mentioned. There's all these descriptions of Freud's cases, and you don't realize that they're all Jewish. Anyway, so that was Freud was the first of 8 children in this family, although one of them died in infancy, and he was his mother's darling, and she favored him over the others. And she often left him in charge of the others. At school, he was always top of the class. He was a bright boy. He was promising, and people would say, oh, he's going to do great things. He decided he pursued a medical career, so he wanted to practice as a doctor. So he got a medical degree. He had to delay his marriage. He had a fiancée. Had to delay his marriage with her because he didn't have enough money. But he was on a track to have a reasonably good income because he was a medical doctor. He worked at a hospital, and in fact the big general hospital in Vienna. But it was a humble job, didn't pay much, and it was. I don't know this for a fact, but I surmise from what I've read that it was sort of routine for medical students to have this kind of a job in the hospital. So anyway, there are three things which Freud, from a very early age, were his goals in life. One was to make lots of money. Secondly, to become famous for having made a great discovery. And thirdly, to have a literary career as an outstanding writer. And so Freud succeeded brilliantly in all those three things. He did make lots of money. He did sell a lot of books that he wrote, and he did become famous for having made a great discovery. Now, I don't think he made a great discovery at all, but still, he became famous for having made a great discovery. And so those three goals, and what mattered to Freud was not the substance of the great discovery, it was that he would be famous for it. And so these three objectives he had from a very young age, he brilliantly fulfilled in his life. So anyway, in 1885 he got a scholarship to go to Paris and to sit in with a famous doctor called Charcot, Charcot, so this added boost to his career because he was on speaking terms with this great figure, Charcot. Now, I don't want to get sidetracked. One of the things I found in giving these talks is that it's easy for me to go off on a tangent and forget something important because I'm discussing something that's tangential. So you have to understand that in the 19th century, Paris was the center of Europe culturally. You also have to understand that there was a tradition that came out of mesmerism or animal magnetism that prevailed in Paris, right? So Mesmer was, I think he was either German or Austrian, but he made his name in Paris. And he promoted something called animal magnetism. Eventually, when animal magnetism started, it wasn't anything to do with the persuasive effect of the therapist on the client or anything like that. It was believed to be a real physical thing, although it was almost supernatural. But it gradually the emphasis shifted to being the effect of the doctor on the patient or the therapist on the client. And then eventually it evolved into something completely unexpected that Mesmer would never have anticipated, and that is hypnosis. So hypnosis became a big deal. So Freud spent this time in Paris. He got to know Charcot, and he came back to Vienna. And so he started up. He had a private practice. He began to make more money, his practice was he was a neurologist, and this is something a bit ambiguous about this, because neurology really would be the study of nerves. And that would be like just looking at human tissue under a microscope and that kind of thing. Freud did a lot of that when he was working at the hospital and when he was, for his medical degree, specialized in this. And a lot of what he did was just looking at tiny bits of human beings under a microscope, right? But of course, there was also the application of this in people's mental life, in their emotional life, which is something rather different, since the connection between these two areas is a bit vague, and was even vaguer then than it is now. So to be a neurologist was sort of a strange, because you had some authority because you knew about the nerves, but actually the nerves didn't have much directly to do with your treatment of patients. The patients would come and they would pay a fee, and the doctor would talk to them, ask them questions, and try to arrive at what was wrong with them. But it was all on that level, right? It's what we would now call psychotherapy. That wasn't it. That term wasn't in vogue at the time. Now, yeah. So in psychotherapy and psychological medicine, it's very fashion conscious, and so at this time, the fashion was for something called hysteria. The vast majority of people who we would call mentally ill, that term wasn't used at the time, but the vast majority of people with problems, or neuroses, as you might say, the diagnosis was hysteria. And hysteria is having all the symptoms of a physical ailment when examination of your body finds no evidence of that ailment. So that's the definition of hysteria. And the vast majority of people who allegedly suffered from hysteria were women. And of course, as we all know, the word hysteria comes from the Greek word for the womb. And of course, all the doctors were men. And by the way, the whole thing that happened in Paris with Charcot, it was at this very famous institution called the Salpêtrière, Charcot and other hypnotists would have female patients, and it was on display, and this definitely had an element of pornography, because all the spectators were male, and the vast majority of the patients were female, and they were made to do strange things under hypnosis, and so on. So this is part of the backdrop to this whole story. Freud, after he'd given up the theory that the seduction theory, and it became the imagined seduction theory, he wrote a book called The Interpretation of Dreams. That was his first book. His first book as a sole author. He co-authored a book about hysteria with another doctor. So his first book as sole author was Interpretation of Dreams, actually available in late 1899, but it has the nominal release date of 1900, and that book brought him quite a bit of fame. Not a huge thing immediately, but gradually from then on, a lot of people read that book, and he followed it up with another book that was also very popular called The Psychopathology of Everyday Life. That was about 2 years later. So he did those books in rapid succession. So we're now getting towards the point where you can say psychoanalysis is a finished thing. So what were the contents of psychoanalysis, this new science which Freud was apparently founding? Freud invented something called the Oedipus complex. Oedipus was a mythical king of Thebes in Greece, right? And the story of Oedipus is that he married his mother and killed his father. And then all kinds of terrible things happened to him. But anyway, so this fits in. Everybody has an Oedipus complex, according to Freud. And actually, a lot of people think that only boys have an Oedipus complex, but actually, Freud thought that girls had an Oedipus complex too. But the girls discovered in infancy, discovered in their unconscious, when they were 3, 4, or 5 years old, that they had been castrated. And so Freud had a theory of penis envy. And penis envy was not a question of men worried about the length of their penises, which you might suppose from the name. It was about women. All women were afflicted by this penis envy. Now, by the way, I probably can't conceal the fact that the whole of psychoanalysis I totally reject. But you do have this occasional, kind of, where something strikes you and you wonder, is there something in it? So I remember back in whenever it was, I don't know what date, but Ellen DeGeneres, who's a well-known in-your-face lesbian, she wrote a book. And this book had the title, My Point, and I Do Have One. And so when I saw that, I thought, maybe there is something in this penis envy thing. But I only thought that momentarily. There is no such thing as penis envy. It's a complete myth, in my opinion. But anyway, so this was part of... psychoanalysis became very much oriented towards dreams, interpreting dreams. And there are symbols like a gate or a jewel box or anything like that is the female genitalia. No argument about that, right? Anything long and protruding is the male genitalia, okay? Any violent motion is sexual intercourse, and so on. So there's all this list of obvious symbology. So this is part of psychoanalysis, another aspect of the evolving system of psychoanalysis is transference and countertransference. So Freud quickly got the idea, in fact I don't think it was quick, I think it was right from the outset, that his patients were in love with him.
Boy.
Right? Now, he didn't think this was a conscious thing. He thought it was in their unconscious.
Like both men and women?
Yes, but he had very few male patients, actually, at the beginning. He had some famous male patients a bit later. But his first, I think, as far as I can recall, all the patients, nearly all the patients in the 1880s, 1890s were female. Oh, there was one little boy, but I don't think there were any grown males. But later on, there were 1 or 2 males who were famous cases of Freud. Yeah. So this was so Freud thought that his patients were in love with him unconsciously. But then he thought that he was unconsciously in love with his patients. So, in other words, well, I mean, I don't know whether to say it or not say it, but there's something a bit creepy about this. Right? I suppose it doesn't hurt to occasionally say the obvious. Now,
Oh God.
So now, let me go back to this whole idea of what his patients had told him. Let me try and make it seem a bit more plausible. If little Tommy blushes every time he hears the name Mary, you might interpret this as meaning that little Tommy is in love with Mary, right? You might. And one way to put that would be to say that little Tommy is telling us by his blushes that he's in love with Mary, right? And so this is where you get this, this idea that Freud's patients were telling him about being seduced by their fathers when they were 4 years old. It's Freud who came up with this idea. The patients never told him this, but he said the patient was telling me this. But they weren't literally telling him, it was his interpretation. So when he switched from the real, it really happened, to it was just imagined to happen, they were both his interpretations. He just changed his interpretation. So this is the origin. And in fact, you know, this is one of the things that researchers have found. People like Frank Cioffi, people like Alan Esterson, they just looked carefully at all the documentation, and they found that in the earliest mentions of these cases, one thing you have to understand is, at the point where this became famous, or where this became noticeable, and the switch from seduction to imagined seduction, Freud had only had like less than 20 patients, because this isn't like a general practice. Each patient comes repeatedly for a period of weeks or months or years and spends money. So they're all comparatively rich Jewish families who are sending their daughters or whatever, or in some cases themselves, to meet with Dr. Freud twice a week for as long as it takes, right? So he only had a few patients. And so it's possible to go back and see that in his earliest notes he says that he shouted and screamed at them, "This happened to you. Your father had sex with you when you were 4 years old," and they wouldn't believe it. And of course, in the Freudian theory, the fact that they wouldn't believe it was proof that it had happened, right? Because this is your unconscious resisting. So this is part of the Freudian. If they had said, "Okay, that happened," then that would be proof as well. So whichever way it goes,
right.
If they said it happened and they denied that it happened, right. Either way, it proves it happened. Right? So this, you know, when describing what Freud believed and what psychoanalysis came to believe, I have this feeling, can this really have been true? But I know it's true. I've read all the stuff. So anyway, this is what happened. So in his earliest cases, Freud would literally scream at the patients, "Yes, it happened," and tried to get them to accept that it happened. I don't think it ever did. I don't think any of these patients ever said that they remembered it happening. Most of these patients eventually stopped coming to see Dr. Freud. Said, "Oh, you know, it's a creepy, crazy doctor," and I went, you know, but he said a lot of nonsense, and that was it. One or two of them were convinced it had happened, but they never said they remembered it. They said, "Well, you're right, it must have happened," but I don't remember it. So it's clear that not a single one of them ever said they remembered it, and most of them weren't convinced that it had ever happened. So, and this applies to the literal seduction and the imagined hypothetical seduction. So what Freud did was he eventually replaced, in his very earliest practice, he tried to do hypnosis, but he was very bad at doing hypnosis. He couldn't handle it. So he found it difficult to put people into a trance. so he gave up hypnosis, but he moved from this from shouting at the patients to try and convince them. And he had various tricks in this early stage, like he would put his palm on their forehead and say, "You're going to remember as I apply pressure to your forehead." And of course they never did. But what he did was he replaced this with the method of free association. So he would bring up a topic, usually one of the patient's dreams, and he would pick something out of the dream and he would say, what does this make you think of? And they would come up with a word. And then he would free associate, get the patient to free associate on that word. And so we're now getting to the third word, right? And then he would ask the patient to free associate on that word. And he would do this as long as it took to get to sex in infancy. And one of the things that was found by people who've studied this is that a lot of patients instinctively want to please the doctor. And so they they know what the doctor's looking for, and so they come up with answers which they think will please the doctor and get the doctor's approval. And so he would always manage to get there. He would always manage to get to sex in infancy, right? Or it would always be sex, but sex in infancy would be ideal. So this is what happened. So just to give a little. If I was to take one of these cases and give you an account of it, it would take as long as this whole talk is taking, right? So I can't do that. But you can read these cases. All his cases were famous, and it's like reading the Bible. You know, people say, "Oh, this case," and that. They all had names, and usually they were the fictitious names of the patient, because when he wrote it up, he gave them fictitious names. But now we know who all these people were because it's been researched and they found out who they were. And one or two of them became quite famous many years later. And they had their opinions, and it was possible to ask them questions. But so anyway...
Wait, so you had said that he had a few male patients right. that became... Who were the famous male patients?
Oh, I'll tell you that in a second.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll go straight there. Well, okay. One example of just the kind of way that that Freud would interpret what the patients were saying and doing. He said he had this patient. It was quite a famous case actually, and he said that he noticed that she was frequently fiddling with her reticule. And if you find that there might be something exciting going on here, believe me, that's nothing to what Freud thought. So the reticule was, women in the 19th century carried around very often. The more fashionable they were, the more likely. This thing called a reticule, and it's like a short drawstring purse, right? So it's got strings and it's like a pouch, and because anyway, there is a background of why that happened. But anyway, this patient had a reticule, and as she was talking to Freud, she would fiddle with it, and so Freud said, well, this you know, it clearly tells us that she wants to masturbate, right? Because the reticule is like her genitalia. So I just thought I'd mention that. I sort of from time to time I've played poker, and I've also watched poker on TV. And one thing I can tell you about poker players is they're always fiddling with their chips, and I know what the Freudians would say about that. But many people who play poker, they fiddle with their chips when they are under particular stress of having to make a difficult decision.
So you shouldn't be making that tell. It's a tell when you do that.
Unless you consciously do it to
I
pretend
think
like you're throwing
there
out
are
a tell.
cases
Right, right.
there are cases in poker where you can't conceal the fact that you're making a difficult decision. Now, it may be that you're absolutely certain you have what we call the nuts, which means the hand that will beat any hand.
How Freudian is that, by the way?
Hmm?
How Freudian is that to
Right,
have the nuts?
The nuts, yeah, of course. Stupid of me not to see that. Yeah, I'm convinced. But you know, but yeah. So there are many cases where you don't mind the opponents knowing that you're making a difficult decision, and you even want them to think, in many cases, that you've got. Anyway, I don't want to start talking too much about poker, but I mean, if on the turn you get the 6 of diamonds, giving you a diamond flush, but earlier on the board there has been the 6 of clubs, meaning that your opponent could have a full house that will beat your flush. He can't have a full house if the board hasn't paired, but he could have a full house, or even 4 of a kind, but that's so rare you can dismiss it. So you're wondering whether you've got a very good hand, a flush, but you're wondering whether he's got a full house. And so what are you thinking about when you're thinking about going back over each bet in the hand to date, how he behaved, and what bet he made, or whether he called instead of making a bet, or you know, whether he raised, and so on. You're trying to interpret everything he did at each step. So that's what you're thinking about. You're not just sitting there thinking, I have a big decision to make here, it's risky. You're actually analysing everything that's happened up to that point. So that's when you see that someone in that position will fiddle with their chips. And believe me, if you're in that position, that's the least erotically inclined position to be in. You're not thinking about that. You're thinking about the mechanics of the hand, and not about anything to do with sex. But of course, a psychoanalyst would say, oh, that's precisely right. It's because it's so desexualized that it means infantile sex. Okay,
Can't win.
Another. This is a slightly more extended example I want to give you. One of Freud's very famous cases involving a male is referred to as the wolf man.
Oh yeah.
So the wolf man, we later found out that his name was Sergei Pankeyev. He was Russian, and he outlived Freud by 20 or 30 years, and he was eventually interviewed intensively by a woman called Obholzer. I forget what her first name was, but anyway, so she was researching this, and she found out that what he said was often totally contradicting what Freud had said in his account of this case. And insofar as it was ever possible to check, the former client was truthful and Freud was not truthful. So she wrote a book about her interviews with the wolf man. Anyway, a key part of this analysis was that Pankeyev had a dream. This is the dream. He's looking out of his bedroom window, and there are 6 or 7 white dogs with bushy tails. These dogs are perfectly still and staring at him, staring at the dreamer, Pankeyev, right? So this is Freud's interpretation of that dream. The whiteness of the dogs refers to, Freud always started referring to them as wolves for no particular reason. So this is why the guy became famous as the Wolfman. So the whiteness refers to bed linens. The dogs represent his parents because there are 6 or 7 of them, because the unconscious is very cunningly disguising the fact that there are 2 parents, right? So this is what the unconscious does. It creates the opposite of what it really means. The dogs being perfectly still represents violent motion and therefore sexual intercourse. The big tails.
What does sexual intercourse represent?
The big tails.
Phallus.
Again, in terms of the opposite, represent castration. Okay. So Freud's conclusion was that as a child, Pankejeff had witnessed his parents copulating doggy style, and this so much upset him that he defecated, and
He literally shit his pants.
he could see by observing his parents copulating doggy style that his mother had no penis. Now, it's been pointed out, what kind of angle would this have to be seen from that he could actually see that? But anyway, so then that reinforces the fear of castration, because he realizes that his mother has been castrated. So this is for now. Pankejeff didn't accept this. He said that's ridiculous. Nothing like that ever happened. So there are always mysteries in these historical things. To me, Pankejeff obviously had some money, since he kept coming back to Dr. Freud. But to me, the big mystery is he kept on paying Freud for 4.5 years. So how is it that these people have nothing better to do with their money than to go and see Dr. Freud, who is telling them a lot of somewhat implausible interpretations? But anyway, this is Pankejeff. But and one of Freud's many dishonest practices was that he would always describe his cases as though he'd cured the patient and the patient had become problem-free, when that never happened once. There's no definite evidence that Freud ever had a successful cure. That someone came to Freud and then they worked out that all this stuff about their Oedipus complex and all that, and it was all sorted through. And after they paid so much to Freud, over years in some cases, there's no evidence that it ever happened that one of them said, "Oh, now I've seen all this, I understand all this, and I feel happy." That just didn't happen. So anyway, that's a famous case, the Wolfman, and anybody can read what Freud says about it, and anybody can read the interviews with the Wolfman later. One thing about the Wolfman was that he couldn't defecate normally. He had to use enemas, and Freud immediately concluded this was repressed homosexuality. I mean, what else could it be? But in fact, he had been operated on it by an incompetent village doctor, and it was an actual injury that had been inflicted on him. And this was later examined and tested, and there's no question. And he never got better. Anyway, whatever the cause, he was never cured of this. But Freud left the impression in his account of the case that he had been cured of this. Another thing about the Wolfman is this: the Institute of Psychoanalysis, I think in New York, sent him substantial sums of money and told him not to come to the United States because this was one of his most famous cases, and they didn't want him shooting his mouth. in America, where there were all these tremendously well off financially and somewhat credulous people who was flooding into the psychoanalytic movement at its height. And this would have been 30s, 40s, and 50s. I'm not sure exactly when, probably 30s or 40s. So that was something. They were actually paying him to stay away from the U.S. And to keep his mouth shut about
all that dirty stuff.
for all the stuff that was not. It wasn't a successful case. He wasn't cured, and his interaction with Freud was not altogether happy, and certainly didn't lead to a resolution of anything. Now, I'll say a few more things about the Freudian movement. Quite early so after about 1900, you have Freud becomes famous, and people start going to Vienna just to meet Freud, and he gets followers, and some of his followers who became quite elevated in the psychoanalytic movement started disagreeing with Freud on various things. The first case was Adler, Alfred Adler. And what happens with a lot of these psychoanalytic people is they accept the basic mechanics of what psychoanalysis does, but they don't think it's all down to sex. They have other things that you're afraid of and that your unconscious is trying to disguise, other than sex, other than childhood sex with your father. So Adler, his particular emphasis was on inferiority, feelings of inferiority, and he invented the term which we've all heard, inferiority complex. And he was the first of the prominent members of Freud's circle, who you'd come in at a certain point and say, oh, he's really in with Freud, and Freud was praising him and recommending him to other people and so on and so forth. They actually fell out, and Adler had to be got rid of. And then the next one was Carl Jung, and Jung was very valuable, was treated as very valuable by the psychoanalysts, because he was a Swiss German. He had his own clinic as a psychiatrist, and he became an adherent of Freud. And he was so close that, what year would it be? I think 1910. Freud and Jung and another psychoanalyst called Ramsay, they toured the US together, giving lectures and promoting psychoanalysis, and they were all one big happy family, the three of them. Eventually both of them were to fall out with Freud, but one of the early ones was Jung. But Jung, when he was first became a Freudian, a psychoanalyst, he was a big catch, because he wasn't Jewish, and he wasn't from Vienna, and he was, everything about him was very, very German, although he was Swiss. His father was a Protestant pastor, and so it was very useful. They all felt it was very useful to praise Jung to the skies, and because he proved to the world that psychoanalysis was an international thing and not associated with any one ethnic group. But anyway, he eventually fell out, and since there were these people were being excommunicated, this reminds me very much of the Ayn Rand cult, that where people were being put on trial and excommunicated, what they eventually did was they, with Freud's blessing, some of the leading psychoanalysts formed the secret committee, And so there were all these, there's all this growing psychoanalytic activity, right, in the institutes. There were lectures, there were all kinds of things. There was journals, and so there was the appearance of pretty free debate. But actually, there were certain points that they wouldn't compromise on. And the secret committee, when they saw that someone was contravening the basic rules, they'd get rid of that person. And of course, I think there were 6 in the secret committee. And so, you know what happens next? The members of the secret committee start being excommunicated. You see, it's just like the Ayn Rand movement, or it's just like the French Revolution, or so many things where there's a cultish atmosphere.
Yeah.
You know, it's like a textbook case. And I haven't said anything about my own reactions to Freud. In the 1960s, I was a member of this group of Marxists, and most of the people I associated with were Marxists. Now, in 1955, Herbert Marcuse wrote a book called Eros and Civilization, and the subtitle is A Philosophical Inquiry into Freud, and it's actually a combination of Marx and Freud. And although in the Communist Party you could not be a Freudian, you'd be expelled from any Communist Party if you were a Freudian. But outside that, you had the freedom to be a Freudian, or to like abstract art, or jazz, or whatever that was banned in the Communist Party. So, a friend of mine who was one of this group of Marxists that I associated with in Birmingham, England in the 1960s, he became a big adherent of this book by Herbert Marcuse called Eros and Civilization, which is a combination of Freud and Marx, and basically says the reason we haven't had a revolution yet is because of sexual repression. So it's not enough to have the class struggle. We've also got to struggle against the Oedipus complex or whatever. We've got to struggle against sexual repression. Because Freud wrote a book called Civilization and Its Discontents. And in that book, he argues that civilization rests upon repression of the instincts. In order to have civilization, you repress the instincts. This is Freud. So Marcuse said, no, we don't have to repress the instincts. If we get communism, we can arrange it so that under capitalism, you have to repress the instincts. But under communism, we'll be able to do without that, and we have complete freedom to do anything that takes our fancy, and we don't have to repress our, for instance, sexual perversions of all kinds are fully okay, and we should stop thinking there's anything wrong with having sex with kids or whatever, because this is just repressing our instincts, and I had a friend who was a big enthusiast for Marcuse's book. So that got me a bit interested in Freud. I was never a Freudian particularly, but looking back on it, I was extremely credulous, and I read stuff by Freud, and I thought, oh, this seems okay. But anyway, that was what happened to me. Orthodox Freudianism was like a church. I think of it as the Freudian church. And gradually, I think it's true to say, within the official Freudian movement, there was a bit more liberality. There was a bit more openness to other ideas. But then you have this phenomenon of people who become quite famous as psychoanalytic writers and speakers. But then they go too far and they're excommunicated. So that was Erik Erikson, I remember, was one of those. Karen Horney was one of those. Karen Horney, her name is spelled Horney, so for many years I thought she was Karen Horney. But anyway, I guess there's a reason why you want to pronounce it Horney. She came from Germany, but She went to New York, I think, somewhere in America. It would be New York. So she she objected to the idea of penis envy, that women were afflicted by penis envy. So she had the theory that men were afflicted by womb envy. So anyway, so one imbecility is called in to outbalance the other. So let me finish up by talking about what has become of all this. Every time she mentions Freud, Candace Owens says that he's the father of modern psychology. She says this every time. That is flatly untrue. It's untrue in this sense. There are hundreds of degree awarding institutions, colleges, universities in the West, and nearly all of them have a psychology department, and you can get a degree in psychology, a bachelor's degree, a master's degree, or a PhD in psychology. If you look at the curriculum in all these places, okay, I haven't looked at all of them, so maybe there are one or two exceptions, but I doubt it, actually. But there is absolutely no Freud. You're not taught any Freud in psychology in the US or Britain or France or Germany today. None. It's totally absent. And part of the reason for that is that that psychology as an academic subject has become very empirical. It's very much focused on empirical tests. You have to to get a PhD in psychology in the US today, you have to do a research project. You have to know some statistics, which of course Freud and all that lot never knew anything about statistics. And you have to be able to find evidence for your thesis in your study. That's very alien to Freud. So so people hear that Freud is the father of psychoanalysis. Well, that's true, but it's sort of tautologically true, because psychoanalysis is the thoughts of Sigmund Freud. There's nothing else to it, right? But then people say, but some people don't know that, and they think, oh, he's the father of psychoanalysis. Really, that's a big deal. But no, it's not a big deal. He's the father of psychoanalysis in exactly the same sense that L. Ron Hubbard is the father of Dianetics. Of course he is. That's his theory. But then what people move to saying he's the father of modern psychology, since that's completely untrue. In that obvious sense that I have mentioned, he's not the father of modern psychology.
And that's something that Candace Owens is saying every time.
She keeps saying he's the father of modern psychology.
In what context? Why did she mention Sigmund Freud?
Oh, she frequently now refers to Sigmund Freud. She says that she accepts the Jeffrey Masson theory, that the seductions really happened, and she says that Freud is the father of modern psychology, which is another way of saying he's tremendously influential among leading psychologists. This is what Candace says, and this comes up quite a lot. She
I thought she was like a journalist, investigative journalist. Why is she talking about Sigmund Freud?
Oh, and her theory is that, see, in her mind, Freud represents the Jews. The Jews are out to rule mankind especially by sexual perversion.
This is tied to Epstein, I have to ask. I mean, this has to somewhat be influenced by Epstein.
Right, yeah, I mean, it's part of that, right? these Jews who run society, according to Candace, are very much into child molestation, and that's how you have people like Jeffrey Epstein. So that's this. She does talk like this repeatedly, and it is. I find it sort of almost embarrassing. It's so bad. But anyway, that's why I'm saying that she hasn't got Freud right. But anyway, yeah, that's her line, and she says this quite frequently now.
Yeah.
And she's not aware of anyway. I think what I can do now is I can. Freud has been very influential, and so I think we have to distinguish 5 different things. One is psychology as an academic subject. And there the answer is Freud used to be very influential, but is totally uninfluential today. So if that's what father of modern psychology means, he is not the father of modern psychology. By the way, I can tell you who is the father of modern psychology.
Cognitive behavioral.
No, that's psychotherapy. No, the father of modern psychology is Wilhelm Wundt. And Wundt is spelled W-U-N-D-T. And he was a German psychologist who was prominent at several German universities in succession. I think most of his outstanding work was done in Leipzig, but I think he ended up in Berlin. And he was earlier than Freud. And he laid all the emphasis on research, empirical research. And so it's not that people in the US today doing a psychology degree talk about Wilhelm Wundt. They don't talk about Wundt and they don't talk about Freud. But what they're doing is much more obviously in the tradition of Wundt and not in the tradition of Freud, right? So I would say that Wundt is the father of modern psychology.
You had said the cognitive behavioral.
Yeah, but that's a very minor part of psychology, which is psychotherapy. I'm coming to that. Okay. So the 5 areas are modern psychology, the general intellectual culture, popular culture, specific academic subjects other than psychology, and then psychotherapy. So I've just said a few things about those. In the general intellectual culture, Freud is still a noticeable influence. Not as big an influence as he was in the 1950s, but still he's an influence. So what this means is that people in literature departments and sociology departments and other humanities subjects, and especially in the studies thing, like women's studies, Africana studies, queer studies, all those, they tend to be influenced by Freudian thinking. Although there has been a big clash between wokeism and Freudianism, because now and then the wokeists, which is roughly equivalent to third wave feminism, they will find out that Freud believed in penis envy. Freud also thought that homosexuality was a disorder, a disease, and a degenerate
inversion
thing, perversion, yeah. Freud thought that any oral sex was a disease and something that needed curing. He certainly he wasn't a feminist at all. I mean, we could talk about the way he treated his own wife. I mean, he was quite affectionate towards his wife, but he didn't expect her to do anything except cook and clean. And when he was rich enough not to have his wife do that, he still didn't want her to do anything particularly ambitious. And also there is this fact about Freud which has come out, that Freud had a long-running affair with his wife's sister, who had moved in with them, her husband died. She became a widow, and then Freud and her would coincidentally take trips to the same spa or whatever, and book in at the same hotel, and just by coincidence. And in fact, there's strong evidence that she had an abortion. One of the things that Freud did, apart from lying about his cases, was he fabricated entire things that never really happened. And it's now believed that many of the examples in the psychopathology of everyday life he just made up. And he made them up out of things that had happened to him. They were supposed to have happened to other people. So there is this involved thing in the psychopathology of it. So I'll tell you what the psychopathology of everyday. It's about slips, mistakes that show your unconscious thing. I have a story about a Freudian slip. When I was about 19 or 20 years old, I used to hang out in the coffee bar, which was in the Birmingham Art Gallery. And I used to go in there a lot and just sit around, read and talk to people. And one day I went in, and there were various tables. And there was one table where there was only one person sitting at that table. And this person happened to be a quite attractive young woman. So I walked over to this table. And I've always been a bit of a klutz, in social interaction. So she had at the table, there were about 4 or 5 places that you could sit at this table, but she was the only person at the table. I walked over and I said, is it okay if I sleep here?
Shame on you.
So that's what we call a Freudian slip, right?
Try that one tomorrow.
It's something that, and of course, I think there's something very un-Freudian about a Freudian slip, because what comes out in a Freudian slip is not something that you're repressing, it's something that's on your mind. So anyway, that's my famous Freudian slip. So the general intellectual, popular culture. Now, in the movie The Titanic, there's a young woman, I forget some of the details of the plot, but there's a young woman who has the opportunity to confront the director of the White Star Line that built the Titanic. And she says to him, and this is obviously seen by the scriptwriter and meant to be seen by the audience as a devastating rebuke, she says, Freud has something to say about men who are over-concerned with size. So this has a number of interesting features. One is that this big accident that's taking place, where thousands of people are drowning and dying of exposure and so on, is happening because men are concerned with size. And they're concerned with size because they're afraid their penises are too small. And so this is, now Freud didn't, I've read pretty much all of Freud, and I'm pretty sure he never argues for that idea, but it's the sort of thing people attribute to Freud, and it's a kind of Freudian idea, because it's something to do with sex that is the real explanation for something else. So that's one example. And there's a similar thing in one of the episodes of Doctor Who, where the Doctor, people here may not know who Doctor Who was, but Doctor Who was a series that was quite popular about a Time Lord, and so the Time Lord Doctor Who looks and talks and behaves like a human, but is really an alien, and he can go back and forward in time. So he's met famous people, and there's a scene where he's confronting some pirate ship. I forget all the details, but where the doctor, and he's always referred to as the Doctor. The name of the show is Doctor Who, but he's never referred to within the show Doctor Who, but just as the Doctor. So the Doctor confronts this pirate who's got a big blunderbuss or some kind of gun, and the Doctor says, you know, I've met Freud, and he said something about guns being a compensation. So again, this is a reference to the idea of being afraid of having a small penis. So so in popular culture, and Freud is mentioned. So the fact that Freud didn't actually say anything about small penises is beside the point. The fact is, it shows that Freud is a people are aware of Freud who write scripts for reasonably popular movies and shows and so on. And there are many other examples like that where Freud comes into, and in fact, I haven't checked recently on this, but in the days when I used to watch more movies and more TV shows than I do today, I think it was true to say that whenever there was a psychotherapist, they tended to be Freudian-style therapists who were concerned about your dreams and your childhood, and they tended not to be cognitive behavioral therapists who are not interested in your dreams or your childhood, right? So that's an example of the way in which the popular media tend to focus on Freud. So I'll say a little bit about psychotherapy. Psychotherapy is not dominated by academic psychology. And all kinds of things go on in psychotherapy, which are not only not academic psychology, they're of no interest to people in academic psychology. So psychotherapy is big business. It's a huge thing. Lots and lots of people do it. Many of them are, there is broad and narrow Freudianism. So narrow Freudianism would be things like penis envy, Oedipus complex, all that kind of stuff. But there is a broader sort of idea of Freudianism, which is your psychological problems today are due to a trauma that you suffered in the past. And the way to tackle that trauma is to relive it and get it to grips with it and understand it. In this way, you can undergo catharsis, to use a Greek word, and you can free yourself from the effects of this. So that whole way of thinking is very common in psychotherapy, and in fact, there is a name for it. It's called psychodynamic therapy, that kind of therapy. And there are also a lot of people who are eclectic, like, and Jordan Peterson springs to mind. Jordan Peterson says that he does cognitive behavioral therapy. But actually, when he starts talking about Freud and Jung, it's clear that he believes in all this psychoanalytic stuff. So he's an example of this kind of muddle and confusion, or eclecticism, whatever you want to call it, that you get. I think I probably said enough to start.
Well, I think you owe us
some discussion.
Some explanation. You wrote a book called "The Conquistador with His Pants Down," and the first essay was "The Conquistador with His Pants Down." So, which I read.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good.
So,
well,
who is a conquistador with his pants down?
That was Sigmund Freud.
Right. And
actually, it's the title of a book, but the book is a collection of essays, and it's also the title of an essay in that book, which was published elsewhere before. The title comes from the fact that Freud wrote to one of his associates and said, "I'm not really a scientist. I'm a conquistador." And if you want a translation, of course this is in German, but he said, if you want a translation, I'm an adventurer. So I was just picking up on that for the title. One thing about the life of Freud is that he had the MO, the following MO. He would try to latch on to someone who was famous or more reputable than he was, who had some kind of position. He would flatter that person, ingratiate himself with that person, become a partner of that person. And then, over time, he would start to plagiarize that person, airbrush that person's achievements out, and represent them as his achievements, and generally change the record so that he was the real genius and this person was comparative non-entity. He did this with Cioffi. He tried to do it, although I don't think he actually met. There was a successor to Cioffi at the Salpêtrière, whose name was Janet, Pierre Janet, Janet, and Freud, by correspondence, I don't think he had met him, tried to cultivate a relationship with Janet, and then he started capitalizing on the fact that he was on speaking terms with, or corresponding terms with Janet, and had been on speaking terms with Cioffi, and started attributing to himself some of Janet's contributions. And eventually Janet noticed this and began to not reply to Freud's correspondence and so on. But the two big cases of this in Freud's life was he attached himself to someone called Joseph Breuer, and then later he attached himself to someone called Wilhelm Fliess. Now Breuer had done some good work in neurology, actually biological, microscope stuff. He'd done some good theoretical work, but he became an associate of Freud, and Freud first was totally flattering and so on. Did I mention about Freud and cocaine?
Not yet.
I left that out, you see. I realised I made some notes, but I realised they're far too full, and I started skipping things.
Is that why his beard was white?
What's that?
Is that why his beard was white?
I don't think so. No. So Freud in the 1880s was a big promoter of cocaine, the wonder drug, and he himself took cocaine in large quantities quite frequently. People who have studied this say that he was not an addict. I think they say that because he was apparently able to stop taking cocaine whenever he wanted to for some particular reason. And there were periods where he would suddenly stop taking it. Whereas other people, there were people he contributed to getting addicted to it, and they didn't find it easy to stop, and so there were various people that he had that effect upon. But Freud promoted cocaine, and the main way in which he promoted it at first was that cocaine was a superb way to tackle morphine addiction. See, it's a bit like, I suppose, what is that substance that...
Heroin?
Morphine.
What's the substitute for heroin?
Narcan.
Hmm?
Narcan.
No, it's
Suboxone?
No,
Suboxone?
it's
I know
Methadone?
Methadone, yeah.
Methadone, that's right, methadone. It's a bit like that, I suppose, except that according to all the people who've written about it, I don't know anything about this myself, it doesn't work with cocaine and morphine. What happens if you try to use cocaine to fight morphine addiction, so all the authorities say, is that you're addicted to two substances instead of one. But anyway, so he was a big promoter of cocaine, and when he got involved with Breuer, he pushed cocaine, and there were several reasons why Breuer began to become a bit suspicious of Freud. but Freud's first book as a co-author was with Breuer, studies on hysteria, and Freud sort of he used certain cases which were Breuer's cases to advance his own ideas. So the whole idea that if you relive a traumatic experience, you can come out the other end and feel better off because you've relived it. That is something that based itself on a case that was actually Breuer's, that Freud wrote about this case of Breuer's quite a bit. And then he became involved with Fliess. And Fliess was someone who had the theory that the cause of psychological and sexual problems was in the nose. And he would operate on the patient's noses to correct an anomaly in their nose, which would improve their sex life and everything else about their personalities. And in fact, there was a case where there was this woman, she was operated on by Fliess, and then after the operation she got worse and worse, and it was discovered that Fliess had left a couple of yards of gauze in her nose. And that, of course, that was going to kill her, so there had to be an emergency operation to get this gauze out. And so she actually was permanently disfigured, and yet she's one of the few cases, she became a proponent of psychoanalysis, although that wasn't a case of psychoanalysis, it was Fliess. But Freud was very much interested in that case, and he wrote to Fliess somewhat later saying, "I realise now why she kept bleeding. She bled out of love for you." So this is transference, you see. Yeah.
So is that those?
I mean, any questions?
Oh, you mentioned Karl. You're going to touch on Karl Popper.
Oh yeah, right. So that's one of the things I left out.
He's right over there.
There he is, Karl, Sir Karl. Yeah. So I think with psychoanalysis, I think there's a sense of bravado. We're saying these things which strike you when you first hear them as being outrageous, but then you learn that that's because of your resistance, and the resistance is your unconscious fighting against these true ideas, and so one question you might have would be, well, how do you know that individuals have an Oedipus complex? How do you know that? And you might take some of these things that Freud said, like the wolf man, I know that when you were young, when you were an infant, you observed your parents copulating doggy style, and you might say to Freud, well, how do you know that? Couldn't it be that the dream has nothing to do with what you saw your parents doing when you were an infant? And of course, this kind of question becomes more conspicuous once you have these varieties of psychoanalysis, like Adlerism and Jungianism and so on. And there were various other people. Otto Rank was one. Wilhelm Reich was another. There were various splits and they had non-Freudian explanations, which were just as gratuitously at odds with the evidence, or unrequired by the evidence, let's say. So the question then is, well, why is it that the patients of Adlerian analysts have Adlerian dreams, while the patients of Freudian analysts have Freudian dreams? So how do we distinguish? So there was a bit of a debate on this, and Popper's idea, which I agree with. I agree with Popper on this crucial thing. Popper argues that for something to be scientific, any discipline or movement or group of theories, for it to be scientific, you have to be able to specify what would happen in the world if the theory was not true. So you've got a theory. So what people tend to do, and what psychoanalysts do, is they pile up confirming instances. But confirming instances are way off the point. What you want to know is, what would be a disconfirming instance? And if everything confirms this theory, then the theory's empty. So this was Popper's argument. So Popper, when he was a kid in Vienna, Popper says that there were various theories going around that were very fashionable, and everybody thought they were the latest theories. One was Freudian psychoanalysis. Another one was Adlerian analysis, which is a breakaway from Freudian analysis. A third one was Einstein's theory of special relativity, it would have been. And the fourth one would be Marxism, the Marxist theory of the class struggle and so on. And Popper was struck by the fact that with Marxism, Freudianism, and Adlerism was a minor thing compared with, in scale, compared with Freudianism, but it just worked out that Popper knew Adler and had conversations with him, so he knew a lot about Adler and Adler's theories, and what he said, that Adlerism, Freudianism, and Marxism, they're all obsessed with piling up confirming instances that support the theory. Whereas what you want to know is, what would be a disconfirming instance? And Einstein said, well, if you measure the perihelion of Mercury at a certain conjuncture, you're going to find such and such because of the gravitational attraction of the planet Mercury on the light waves. I've probably got this wrong, but
it's distortion of space-time.
Yeah, right. So distortion of space-time, right? Dilation of space-time. So and eventually that experiment was conducted. It wasn't an easy thing you could do at any moment. It required an expedition to the South Pole or somewhere to observe something, and it produced a surprising result that contradicted the pure Newtonian theory and conformed with just what Einstein had said would happen. So Einstein wasn't when he developed his theories, it struck Popper clearly that Einstein was not trying to find confirmations.
Yeah, that's the essence of science, is trying to disprove failing, and if you continuously fail to disprove, that's evidence that it's true.
Or it's evidence that it has survived so far.
Yeah,
So you could take a very modest view of that.
But you try and disprove it.
So this is all due, that line of thinking is all due to Popper.
Is this all the falsifiability thing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, and that's all due to Popper. And Popper actually, Popper thought that Freud had got hold of something that was true. So I think Popper was wrong in that. But he said, it's not scientific. It has not become a science because the community of psychoanalysts are not prepared to say what it would be required. So let's suppose that that one day that there happens to be someone who doesn't have an Oedipus complex. How would you know that? And someone who took this up, actually, there was a well-known American intellectual, Sidney Hook, who was very active, I think in the 50s and 60s. I think he's long since dead. But he was well known for all kinds of things. I mean, you know, at the time he was an all-purpose intellectual. And he made a point of going to meetings of psychoanalysts and saying, if someone didn't have an Oedipus complex, how would you know? And none of them had an answer. But they all agreed that he was a dangerous psychotic, and because he kept on asking that question. One of the things, you know, when I first read Freud, I remember reading 2 short accounts of psychoanalysis, which came out from Penguin in the 1960s, and I read it and I thought, well, this seems okay. And it's all this, I believed all this stuff about Freud saying, my patients told me this. But then I realized it wasn't true. It was just their imagination. It didn't occur to me. I could have thought a bit about it and realized Freud, at that time that he wrote that, had less than 20 patients. And every one of them had told him that their fathers had had sex with them when they were infants. Every one. Now, maybe incest is more common than some people like to think, but really, 100% of his patients. But I didn't think like that. I just thought, oh, that seems reasonable. And, you know, so, but then I read Popper. And at first I didn't get on with Popper at all, but then eventually, Popper wrote one thing where he took Freud had the statement. Oh, sorry. Freud had the statement in The Interpretation of Dreams that every dream is a wish fulfillment, right? Every dream is a wish fulfillment. And so the question then arises, what about nightmares? Or what about dreams that are not exactly nightmares, but they're filled with anxiety? How do you account for those? If there's supposed to be a wish fulfillment, you'd think if it's a wish fulfillment, it's saying that everything's fine. You know, so why would you have a nightmare or an anxiety dream? And Popper analyzes everything Freud said about that and shows how he's always promising to give an answer at some point, but he never quite gets there. But then he starts talking as though he's given an answer. This is typical Freud, of course. He'll talk about something and say, we're going to get to that. And then later he'll say, well, we've already discussed that. Yes, but you didn't answer the point. So, you know, Freud he had tremendous talent as a convincing charlatan, a convincing mountebank, a convincing deceiver. And he's got all these tricks which you eventually learn are standard with Freud. And one of them is a show of modesty. So he will say, he'll say, well, my patients told me that they'd had sex with their fathers when they were 4 years old. And I eventually realized that this couldn't be true. Now you may shake your head at my credulity, but I believed them when they told me this. All the while, of course, they didn't tell him that. He had inferred it from the fact that they had symptoms. Now, many years later, so that's the kind. So you think, oh yeah, he's a forthright person who's admitting that he should have been more sceptical of what these patients had told him, all the time gliding over the fact that patients never told him any such thing. He has a lot of these kinds of tricks where, he makes a parade of his own honesty and responsibility and unwillingness to be hoodwinked. And this is all part of the persuasive technique.
I have to ask you, okay, was the word subconscious in existence, or did he actually come up with a
No, it would have been long been in existence.
It was?
Yeah.
It was? He didn't invent the word subconscious?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, he didn't use the word subconscious, he used the word unconscious.
Okay.
Other people did talk about it. And in a way, subconscious is a kind of an indication of something like a Freudian way, because subconscious implies it's there, but it's not conscious. It's below conscious.
And was that the concept that he created or invented?
No, none of this was new to Freud. People were talking about the unconscious. There is a famous book by Ellenberger, his name is, and it's called something like The Discovery of the Unconscious. And a lot of it is about pre-Freudian people talking about the unconscious.
So how about id, ego, and superego?
Oh yeah, you see, that's quite late after Freud. After Freud, the whole thing had been developed and had a following. Freud introduced this new terminology. Now, actually, I only found out comparatively recently that in the original German, Freud didn't say id, ego and superego. He said the I, the ich, the over-I, the über-ich, and the it, the es, right? But Strachey, who was a huge propagandist for Freud and translated into English, he Latinized those words, and that was approved by Freud later. Now I don't know whether they changed the original German or not, but anyway, yeah. So we had this, what we now know as the id, the ego, and the superego. So the id is the unconscious, and it comes from the Latin word for the it, meaning it came over me, I don't know where it came from, that kind of thing. It's this unconscious. The ego is just the I, the ich, and that's the personal, self-conscious person, self-identification. And then the over-I, or the superego, is like a conscience. It's something that has a view of what's proper. Actually, that's another example of popular culture. There's a movie, a very early science fiction movie, called A Forbidden Planet.
Yes.
And in that story, there's this planet where things are being wiped out by this mysterious, powerful force. And I'm trying to remember it now, but the denouement, the solution to this problem of this powerful force that seems to be killing everybody, is that this civilization on this distant planet from Earth, distant from Earth, they had found a way to turn their thoughts into material entities. But they overlooked the fact that their unconscious, their id, that all the horrible demons that lurk in the unconscious would also come into being. So there is that line in the movie, which I remember, monsters from the id.
Yeah. And they turned the machine on, and like within one day, everybody was killed.
Right.
Because all their... There's an analog also in transactional analysis, parent, adult, child, which maps very nicely, I think. Child is your id, your ego is your adult.
Right.
Yes. And your parent is your superego.
Yeah.
It's your... I think that maps quite nicely. So is that that seems to me to be valid. I mean, in terms of
You really
the way
think so?
of thinking, yeah.
Well, what is the id then?
Is the child. It's just
Oh, I see.
just wants. Like you want to eat, for example.
Yeah.
That's just your pure desire. And then the adult is your rational part, and the parent is your social conditioning, basically. I mean, I think that maps pretty well.
Well, but I mean, there's a distinction, I think.
Yeah.
It's clear that you have urges and you don't know where they came from.
Yeah.
That's true. But is it true that you have destructive urges that you can't control?
Well, it's why you'd become a drug addict, for example. You just want the drug.
You've wanted to strangle somebody and you've not done it, or
right. But I mean,
like, oh God, I want to slap them, and you don't.
But I mean, I think that if you become a drug addict, and let's assume that this is disastrous for you and it ruins your life, can't you just say that's a miscalculation? I mean, that you...
Well, I'm saying there's a raw desire, just things you want because you want.
Right, but so arguably there could be some chemical substance which makes you feel very good, but which you then become addicted to and which has a very bad effect upon you.
And when you stop taking it, you're in incredible pain.
Right, okay. Well, I mean, I've got views about addiction. Actually, I don't think it's that straightforward.
I think eating.
But even if it was, let's just accept all that. The point is, that's not something in your unconscious which is trying to hurt you. It's just that there is a way of living which is a bad move, so to speak. There are things you can do which, if you're not alert to the dangers, can cause a lot of problems. I mean, I don't see that there is something going on in your unconscious. I don't.
It doesn't have to be unconscious. I'm just saying you have just raw desire.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Socrates talked about this too. I'm forgetting the terminology now, but the or you could look at. I'm sorry. I'm starting to flitter all over the place. You have Jonathan Haidt, where he talks about the model about the elephant and the rider, and the elephant is your feeling part, and the rider is rational part. He has just two parts.
Right.
And because there are things you want, I would say, things you want, like, I want to eat a cookie. I just want to eat that cookie.
Right.
And there's no, whereas the rational part of me can say, you know what, it's probably not good if I eat too many of those cookies.
So biologically speaking, we know you have your brain, and you have your lizard brain, which is fight, flight, finding a partner, and food. And so we know in your brain you have this the same as any animal out there, where you have that fight or flight, finding a partner and having food. Me, obviously, food is a major thing. I don't know if my ancestors were all starved to death or what, but but so we know that. So
you say partner, but I think the proper term is breed stock.
Okay.
Yeah, I unfortunately I really need to leave. Thank you very, very much for the presentation. I just wanted to toss out there, I think it's very cute. I know how seriously you want to take it is up to you, but there's this Pixar movie, Inside Out. Have you ever seen this?
No.
It's very clever. Just to tell you how it starts out, this is the first 2 minutes of the movie. It starts out with a newborn baby, and you see that the only part of the personality inside her is joy. The baby's just happy to have been born. And then very quickly, another part comes along, and this is modeled in the head as distinct creatures, or like little people,
Right.
And it's all about how the various parts, ways of thinking. You got anger, you've got joy, and I'm blanking on what the others are. You have these different
jealousy,
or yeah, okay, and it's beautifully done because you see this character acting in real life, and then you see what's happening inside, and it's just, you don't have to take it completely literally, but it's very cleverly done, I think. Anyway, Inside Out, Pixar.
Oh,
So,
I'll look out for it. Yeah.
I think you would enjoy it. It's just,
was there ever a concept that you could be sick, not physically sick, but mentally sick prior to Freud?
Oh yes, of course.
You think so? That there was a thing called mental illness before he was around?
It wasn't called mental illness, I don't think.
See you next time.
Oh
See you
yeah,
later.
thanks,
See you, Jim.
thanks for coming. Canst minister to a mind diseased? That's a line from Shakespeare.
Okay, so
I think
that
it's
did
from Macbeth.
precede-
I think I'm trying to remember.
That preceded Freud, obviously.
Yeah, yeah. So
People thinking people were possessed by demons or something was probably.
You didn't have doctors, though. You didn't have a doctor of your. You didn't have psychologists or doctors that dealt with your
well,
thinking or your.
But you had mental mental wards for people.
Okay, yes, you had asylums, or at least if I were to, there was a movie about
the famous
Amadeus
one in
and
England,
Salieri is in an asylum.
Bellevue?
So
what's that?
Bellevue?
No, not Bellevue. Very famous, and I can't think of it right now.
it's just that before this, I don't.
Bedlam.
You don't think that Freud invented mental therapy or mental health?
No. That's all
Probably
way
not.
before Freud. No, I mean,
Because I would lock you up in an asylum, or I'd call you a witch and burn you at the stake. I mean,
right, but the thing that developed around the same time as Freud, but I don't think Freud had anything to do with it, was the distinction between. I mean, Freud talked a lot about neuroses. So, I mean, I said this, but just to be clear, in Vienna in the 1880s and 1890s, there was almost only one kind of mental illness, although we wouldn't even call it, they wouldn't have called it mental illness, and that was hysteria. There wasn't a kind of, concept of someone who just feels terribly anxious, for example.
an anxiety disorder.
Right,
or phobia
there wasn't really a clear-cut understanding of things like that. If you were anxious, well, just pull yourself together. There was this sort of whole Victorian attitude. Well, it's Victorian, but it was in other countries than England.
What about depression?
Melancholy.
Melancholy, yeah.
But that probably wasn't really an illness.
So you don't think that Freud, though, had a role in
I don't think Freud did anything really.
towards DSM? Was the diagnostic DSM.
What the interesting thing is that that this thing that Charcot had at the Salpêtrière, this was like a big prison for women who didn't fit in, and women who were just disorderly, and they were all women. There was a big population of women, and they were all in captivity in this thing. And they were then experimented upon by Charcot and so on. And one thing that Charcot did was, you see, you'd have cases where someone would would say, my whole arm is paralyzed. My right arm is paralyzed, right? Now, so, one possibility is this is pure pretense. They know there's nothing wrong with them, but they're just saying.
Okay, so
right.
there was hypochondria.
So that would, no, but I mean not hypochondria, just someone who for some peculiar reason is trying to deceive you and says, my whole arm is paralyzed. Now, one thing you could do is you could catch them by surprise and stick a pin in their arm. And if their arm is really paralyzed, whether it hurts them or not, they can't move their arm. But in fact, no one can do that act. I mean, you will move in response to something like that, right? So, but then, the thing is that what they noticed, now I'm not sure whether this was Charcot himself or whether it was one of his predecessors. They thought of the possibility that this direct stimulus of sticking a pin in, especially doing it by surprise, I'm told from what I've read, I don't know anything about the anatomy or physiology, so this is I'm just taking the word of physicians right on this, is that if in fact your arm is paralyzed, there are still going to be things going on in your arm which are not paralyzed. In other words, there are if you catch certain nerves, you will react. Whereas, so this is how this idea of hysteria developed, because the hysterical person, there is no distinction, and so this leads to the theory that when someone has a hysteria, their own theory of how the body works is affecting. The mental theory of how the body works is affecting what's happening. And so one of the things they did was they tested this with hypnosis. You find a really good hypnotic subject and you tell him or her that their right arm is paralyzed. You tell them that under hypnosis. And then they act as though their arm is paralyzed, and you can stick a pin in here and there, and it's just like hysteria, but it's the mental picture they have of what their whole arm means. Okay. So, in other words, someone who actually has a disorder that paralyzes part of the body, it won't be like that. There will be places in the arm where they will react because the muscles and nerves are not aligned the way our naive picture of them is. And so this was considered a breakthrough, that hypnosis could simulate hysteria. And so this is one of the reasons why hysteria became all the rage. There were other kinds of neurotic conditions. Neurasthenia was one. And neurasthenia was a general feeling of lassitude and hopelessness. And it was much more a disease for cultivated gentlemen and not rowdy lower class women. Rowdy lower class women had hysteria sometimes. And so, there is the interaction of these social attitudes with the objective diagnosis, but there is also this apparent fact that they discovered, that there is hysteria, and it's the same as being hypnotized.
And this was before Freud?
This is all before Freud.
Okay,
yeah.
so...
Yeah.
I had a question. So, psychology in the present time doesn't really deal with Freud at all.
Right.
But there's other intellectual currents that take Freud seriously and incorporate, like, didn't you mention, I think at one point in the past, and I think I've heard other people of like the broader left talk about, like, for example, Jacques Lacan.
Yeah.
And there's like the whole psychoanalytic being fused
right.
with Marxism or something like that. Why was that move taken?
Well, you know, Jacques Lacan is a philosopher who is a super Freudian. I mean, I don't know much about Lacan.
Super Freudian.
But he's takes Freud to extremes, you know. You know, he's one of that group who are now called postmodernists. but really, they're an assorted group and they're not all the same. And Lacan is not at all like Foucault, for example. It's just peculiar to Lacan that he believes in all these Freudian things. I mean, I say it's peculiar. There are maybe other people like there are these two co-authors, Deleuze and Guattari, who've written books that are very incomprehensible in the prose, and they introduce a lot of these Freudian notions mixed in with Marxist notions.
What's the overall project for? Is it like to give Marxism some kind of update to make it?
Well, I think some people have that. I mean, I think, but it, you know,
I'm not even sure the question I want to articulate. But
right.
Like,
I mean, there within Marxism, of course, you have to understand that in France and Italy after the Second World War, the biggest political party was the Communist Party. And it's not like Britain or America, where to be a member of the Communist Party was to be on the fringe. In France and Italy, in the late 40s and early 50s, the Communist Party was huge. And general intellectuals who wrote essays and book reviews and so on, were much more influenced by the ideas of the Communist Party than they were in places like Britain or America. Marxism was something that people felt they had to deal with. Whereas in Britain or America, most people didn't have any thought of being a Marxist. You know, it didn't cross their mind. And even people, for example, who were sympathetic to the Soviet Union, and there were many of those in both Britain and America, they didn't think of themselves as Marxists, for the most part. So it's a completely different intellectual climate in these different countries. In France, you know, I mean, Sartre was someone who was always flirting with the Communist Party and never quite committing to it, and eventually, of course, suddenly turned against it. You know, in 1968 was a big turning point when they had the student revolutions and the Communist Party maintained a conservative sort of attitude and held back, whereas you had all these new groups that were Marxists or neo-Marxist in some way, which and had no respect for the Soviet Union or the Communist Party. So that's a breaking point. And in the 60s, that's where you get these people who later became postmodernists, although nobody called them that in the 60s. It's only much later that they were called postmodernists. And nobody argued they were all the same, although a lot of them were branded as post-structuralists. And that was because they they were reacting against what had been the dominant paradigm in France, which was based on Levi-Strauss and Saussure, which had these structuralist assumptions. So they were taking a theory of social anthropology and applying it to philosophy.
Will Candace Owens single-handedly revive interest in Freud at a broader scale?
Yeah, we didn't say much about Candace.
I don't think she's taken that seriously to have that much of an effect.
Yeah.
No, I do think it's a big part of her message now.
But I don't know how many people listen to her.
A lot.
More than listen to anybody else in the world.
It's a lot.
Only more than anybody in the world.
Really?
Yeah.
She's
Candace Owens is the
I'm on
number
drugs
one.
or something. I haven't been
Candace-
listening to
High
her
up there.
regularly.
She could be higher than Tucker Carlson.
I'm
right
on
at
crack.
the
I
neighborhood
did not know
of
this.
Rogan.
Yeah. No, she's the number one. She's
Justin,
been,
do you listen regularly to Candace Owens?
I'm sure he does not.
I listen. I've got people who will often send me the stuff, and it's really ridiculous.
She doesn't show up in my YouTube feed. Okay.
She's not big on YouTube. She's on the other Rumble or
I watch her on
Where
YouTube.
the cool kids hang out? Okay.
Where you have to pay. YouTube is pretty much free.
Yes.
So she's up there at the highest list, at the rank at the highest. It's not the same rank as Rogan. Rogan's is a podcast, another list. So she's equivalent to Rogan in that area. It's not comparable to the people on YouTube. But occasionally we get fed with Candace Owens or Nick Fuentes. That's someone somehow take a piece to their video and put it on YouTube. Their channel is on YouTube. So we don't get them directly unless you subscribe to Rumble or the other places.
But I watch everything Candace does. It's on YouTube. Everything is on
That's
YouTube.
someone transferred from. That's not Candace.
Oh, it is.
It
is Candace. It's Candace.
So she could be on multiple platforms.
No, I mean,
but
I
on
think,
those special
the
platforms,
argument-
she's top.
The argument then is that Candace is like Freud, very influential.
Yeah. Oh, she's bigger
And
than
full
Freud.
of shit.
No,
I mean,
no.
she talks all day. There's some gem, there's some shit. So you just have to use your judgment.
I mean,
Can't
you see,
take everything.
you see,
with
Candace-
Just like Robert F. Kennedy, some of his stuff is.
Yeah, exactly. She's human. She's
Candace
just human.
is, and I think she recognises this. I think she has an accurate grasp of what she's doing. She's an investigative journalist, and
What are some investigative journalist works that she's broken?
She has totally destroyed Erica Kirk and PT USA.
In what way?
Because the huge number of people now understand that after the death of Charlie Kirk, PT USA was immediately taken over by this group of people who were controlled by the Zionists and have no affinity with Charlie Kirk whatsoever.
And no one.
But Charlie Kirk was a Zionist, though.
Charlie Kirk turned against Zionism in his last few months of life.
At the very least, with
Now
regard
we're
to
going
the
to get
Iran
to
War.
a conspiracy.
No one has rebutted Candace Owens, as far as I have heard.
Yeah, people have.
No, nobody has rebutted her on Charlie Kirk.
Right, nobody
She was
has.
a close
How
friend
do you
of Charlie
explain
Kirk.
that?
She was. She wasn't never invited to his wedding. She got, I think she was fired from TPUSA. She was fired from...
She wasn't fired from TPUSA. She was fired from Daily... What
yeah,
do you call it?
the other Jewish
Daily
guy's
Wire.
place,
She was fired from the Daily Wire.
Yeah, that guy.
The guy, what's his...
Charlie Kirk would be full-throatingly supporting Iran. He was...
What are you saying?
I'm saying Charlie Kirk's a Zionist, and she's not exposing anything.
Have you heard him
she supposed the whole thing.
Talking about his problems with Israel?
Jewish, but that doesn't mean he's like, I'm not the Zionist anymore.
Yeah,
I mean, he would be
totally
full.
anti-Zionist talk.
Charlie Kirk turned against Zionism. There's no question about it. There's a huge number of communications from Charlie Kirk. And one that popped out of the woodwork that nobody knew anything about.
Can't talk about it.
What?
She asked who killed Charlie Kirk, and I'm just like, I can't talk about it.
Well, it was
Not the
it was
guy
obviously-
they caught.
I'm provoking how my.
No, but you know, there was this.
They got the guy.
There
Talk about cookies.
there was
These
there was
are so
this
good.
whole
The
thing.
guy
thank
that
you.
Yeah.
Thank you very
Erica
much.
forgave.
Um,
Not that guy.
Recipe. I just made them yesterday.
Yeah.
Today.
but what's his name?
Tyler Robinson?
Brett Weinstein. He had been communicating, and this was unexpected. Nobody knew this. He had very full communications with Charlie Kirk, and Charlie Kirk said, I think we're too beholden to Israel and things like this, and we absolutely should not go to war with Iran and so on,
Which you
Brett-
would have sympathized
Brett
with.
Weinstein.
This is-
I agree with him. Yeah, and Brett Weinstein said, I agree completely.
I think he would have supported it. He's flip flopped on a lot of things. He's had no principles. He only goes whatever's with popular with the GOP. Charlie Kirk.
Charlie Kirk had
I don't think
principles.
that-
Okay, so Charlie Kirk. I mean, this is just one example I can think of. Charlie Kirk was for Juneteenth, and then once it became a thing, he was against Juneteenth. That's just one thing I can think of.
I don't know about
But
that.
he, big government sucks. That was like one of the Charlie Kirk TPUSA slogans. But then you go to see a TPUSA event and it's all like, let's build the wall and let's build up the military.
That's okay, but small government in terms of like intrusiveness into your life rather than legitimate things that government should be doing, like defense of the homeland, which you can think the wall is a good or a bad idea, but that the wall is an indicator of like big government, I don't think so. I just don't think you can get there.
Right, it's not just
both
the
in terms of like the budget line for that, compared to how much money have we given to Israel versus how much would the wall have cost. It's a lot more money that has been given to Israel, for example. Or building up the military. You can agree or disagree on how big or how small the military is, and those are legitimate debates to have. But like, if he wanted a robustly large enough military to be, powerful or whatever, you could easily make the very plausible, charitable argument on his behalf that it was like, if you have a, I don't think he'd be in favor of, for example, like the military-industrial complex, and let's get the military spending to $3 trillion a year. I don't think he would have been in favor of that, but like having a sufficiently large military to handle, any and all conceivable threats, like there's nothing big government about that. Like I just don't think that's an accurate framing of it. But like, and one other thing is, as far as the, even if you wanted to dispute the idea that he turned against Zionism, maybe it was sort of like he was in the process of doing it and he probably would have ended up in that place eventually. I don't know. I didn't follow Charlie Kirk all that much. I know that I saw a couple of different clips of him talking about the Iran war, or going to war with Iran was a bad idea.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and that was recent.
Very strongly.
Yeah. So, and then like, then the question becomes like, okay, what's the difference between flip-flopping and changing your mind based on like, oh, I hadn't thought of it that way. Oh, here's a good argument. Oh, here's some evidence I hadn't considered or was unaware of until now. Like, trying to figure that out can be a little tricky. I didn't follow Charlie Kirk all that much. If I had to take a guess, I think he was a man of at least some principle. To think that he was, like an unprincipled man and he was just a flip-flopping opportunist, like, I suppose that's possible, but that's not the impression I get. You know what I mean? But those are
if you never change your mind, you're stubborn. You never grow. You never look at new information. But if you change your mind, then you're flip-flopping. So you can't win. So we really have to...
I believe that you can. I believe that there's certainly good faith, genuine changing your mind. I don't think Charlie Kirk was in that category, though.
And that Joe said, the purpose of science, you're trying to disprove something, and if you can't disprove it, then when Joe was here, he said that. He said, so I have my theory, and then all swans are white, and then you see a black swan. You say, I've disproved your theory. You know, it's
The politically correct term is
Another-
non-white swan.
not.
Another layer is you use your judgment when you see someone changes a tune or changes opinion. So it's your judgment whether he's just to cater to what's popular, or you genuinely has a grow in your mind. That
If he was that
so it's
much-
a judgment call. If he
was
look
that
at
much,
this-
if he was that much of an opportunist or a flip flopper, like, why would he even countenance the idea of thinking that like Jewish donor influence was too strong? Like, they're giving you
Right.
money. Why would you question that if you had no principles at all? But the fact that he did, I think, is a very strong indicator that he had at least some principles. Because going against that current is difficult and hazardous.
right.
So,
Definitely,
you know, I just don't, I don't accept
That's,
the idea that
that's
he had
what
no
I get.
principles.
Here's what really happened though, is Benjamin Netanyahu was watching YouTube and he's like, check out this guy who's arguing with college freshmen. He's really onto us. Let's take him out.
Anything's possible. Anything's possible. I mean, you know,
Netanyahu's too afraid to debate Charlie, so he had to take him out because he knew he would have lost.
Sorry.
No, it's not a debate. It's not winning or losing the debate. It's how influence Charlie Kirk would have. Right? Winning and losing a debate means nothing in the big picture or in the political arena. It's how this person has influence on who, which part of the population. So
I
we put
think-
too much in the debate. I mean, we're gonna have a debate, but I really don't. I think
I
it's
totally
just for
described
fun.
something that was fictitious. It was a
I mean,
joke.
what I see is what you saw from my YouTube feed, or to a lesser extent my Facebook feed. But I'm also aware of the power of the bubble that those social media platforms create for you, with no exception. So I have reservations. I never seen any reputation rebuttal to what I saw from the prevailing my bubble. But I have reservation. It's something outside my bubble that I haven't seen. So I can only say I haven't seen any rebuttal to what I saw. All those he was killed before he really publicly turned his turn against the Zionism. That's what I believe because that's what I saw. But I also have reservations, like I said, because of the bubble thing.
you know, as far as that whole conspiracy theory, do you know who's very much against that conspiracy theory? Is Nick Fuentes. He thinks that Charlie Kirk was, you know, a Zionist all the way till the end, that he was kissing Zionist butt all the way till the end, and he thinks that the conspiracy theories that, you know, Israel killed Charlie Kirk or whatever are just like, you know, low IQ, blah, 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 blah. I don't really have an opinion one way or the other. You know, if it turned out that that is what happened, then I'd be like, yeah, that makes sense. If it turns out that it didn't happen, I'd be like, yeah, some, you know, trans ideology addled freak decided to, you know, take somebody off the board who, you know,
It's much more likely that Netanyahu did it.
It's not just Israel killed Charlie Kirk.
No, it
It's
is.
anyone that doesn't like Charlie Kirk turning against Zionism who might have killed him. It's not necessarily Israel per se, or
see, that's the kind of like, you know.
Yeah, the
There's
fact
a lot
that
of
he
people
did
who talk
World War
against
I was
Zionism.
One Serbian guy who
well,
had a
if you
good
have no
shot. I mean,
such influence, then they will leave you alone.
Even
But
there's
it's
lots
just,
of
you know.
influential people who critique Zionism who aren't assassinated.
Well, if you number one, if
but-
you take their money, right? If you take loads of their money,
No, it's
and
not
then you
even-
turn against them, and they may have extra layer of anger against
No,
you,
it's-
more
it-
reason to kill this
It's
person.
not even
Sure,
that.
yeah,
it's not
maybe.
even that. It's not even that. If there was a plausible, again, I'm not going to weigh in on like, you know, what I think is more likely. It doesn't matter. What happened, and it's hard to believe anything that anybody is saying about any of that kind of stuff. But
well, you still don't
if there was a plot by a foreign country in the Middle East, or somebody who is, you know, allied with the foreign country in the Middle East to take him out, it would make sense for them to do it, because one of the things that the whole Zionist crew has been acutely aware of, especially recently, is the declining support for Zionism amongst the younger generations, right?
So we got to take them out.
Older. So let me finish before you straw man with sarcasm every single thing, right? So, you know, and Ernie nods his head because he knows there's a generational divide in support for Israel. And if Israel...
Dimmer is better. Oh, you see the difference.
Especially generation.
I turn it dim
Hey,
at 29
Ernie, you
minutes.
better not critique
face looks
Israel.
much
They're going to
better.
take you out.
Well, I know. God. I've been
Again,
worried
it's
about
it's
that for a
it's
while.
a it's a you know the
You will
snide
see.
remarks are a straw man. You're continuing to straw man the thing.
No, it's not really
Ernie,
a straw man.
It is a straw man.
No,
because
straw man would be like me saying, "This is what Vic said" when he didn't.
It's
I'm making jokes, bro.
It's jokes, but it's the Jon Stewart thing. Like, oh, I'm just a comedian. Don't take me seriously. But like,
Jon Stewart's
you
way
are,
more funnier than I am.
He is
We'll talk about
gifted. He is gifted at what he does. But the point I'm making is, there's a generational divide, and if Zionists in Israel see loss of broad support for their project as a looming danger in the United States, that's an existential threat to them.
Yeah.
Until they can execute on their Greater Israel project, where they can become big enough that they, you know, have all their rivals in the region are weakened. You know, like Iran is the final like brass ring or whatever. Like, the thing that they need the most is to postpone the inevitable breakaway of public opinion. They have to postpone the onset of that as quickly as possible. Do you know who would have been the most risky prospect for accelerating that break? Is if Charlie Kirk, who millions and millions of young people looked up to, like lots of people were like heartfelt, like devastation when he got assassinated. If that guy was on the cusp of turning against the Zionist project, don't you think that the people for whom the Zionist project is so critically important for them, don't you think they'd see that as an existential threat?
No.
You don't think so?
Well, they
Okay.
wouldn't. They wouldn't have
Prove
a.
that they are. I mean,
That's
so
what I
we're
see.
going to assassinate
That's what
Charlie
I see.
Kirk because he's going to accelerate the youth turning against Israel.
It'd be the worst thing.
So the Jews are very smart, right? And they rule the world. So you think that they would already preemptively not want to tie themselves to the assassination. So, I mean...
Which Jew are you talking about? All Jews? They all think
the same
alike?
collective Jew that
They all think
the
alike?
Zionists, whatever you guys
What
are all
about
saying.
other Jews? What?
Well,
Are you
Jews
gonna
didn't kill
love
Charlie Kirk,
all
so it doesn't
Jews?
matter.
Think alike, synchronously. How is that possible?
Okay.
Or is it your way of
Keller.
thinking?
Oh, I saw
projecting
that,
onto-
Yeah.
I
I've
mean,
always been a bit.
I'm
what you're
picking-
saying
I didn't read
is
it.
what I hear.
It's on YouTube.
But like I said, maybe I'm in a bubble, but I have no reason to disagree with you.
I'm just
I was
seeing...
just
The
saying maybe I'm in a
plausibility
bubble, or maybe I
is
just
ridiculous.
don't know better.
Why would they go to all? So let's turn. So let's be sloppy enough that they think that we're behind on it, to then further accelerate hating us even more. It just doesn't. I don't think it makes any sense.
Oh,
Why?
no, that makes some sense.
It does not make any sense at all.
That makes some
Why? Hold on. So, the mainstream take, which may end up being right, if I had to take a guess, I'd say, you know, only a light edge to Tyler Robinson is the guy who did it. That's what I'm going to go with until I have, you know, something more to go on the more conspiratorial angle. But all I'm saying is, I can see the incentives and the reasoning play out. You don't see it that way. You know, Charlie Kirk, you know, why would they go through all that trouble? And it's sloppy. It's like, it isn't sloppy because, you know, the foremost, at least as far as I can tell, the foremost critic of Israel Zionism and the influence and all that is Nick Fuentes, and he believes that all that conspiracy stuff that Israel had something to do with Charlie Kirk's assassination is just absolutely garbage, absurd, low IQ crap.
Wouldn't it make it more sense for Israel to kill him than Charlie Kirk?
He doesn't have a
One of the
No.
organization.
Things,
He's
there's
just
a
one
couple
person.
things you guys are missing.
That's a difference.
Number one was that there was a gunman, and did you ever read the writings? And I didn't myself, I haven't. But have you read the writings or heard any from the social media posts or whatever from the actual guy who was the trigger man?
I remember
It was Mossad.
I remember it was like there were texts or something between him and his trans roommate or lover or whoever that was.
Partner.
And partners, whatever. And maybe it's legit, maybe it's not. I'll go with legit until I have a really strong reason to believe otherwise. But some of that interaction just seemed a little bit too open and on the nose to me for me to just buy it. You know, again, I bet that that's authentic more than not. But it's not like super convincing. It just seemed a bit stilted and performative.
Have you compared
the other thing that when he was assassinated, I personally said, "Oh wow, this guy's an amazing shot." Then I met up with two men who said the machines that he was using did what they were invented to do. So I had thought that if you had shot somebody from a roof, 200 or 300 feet, you had to have been an incredible marksman. But the men told me no, even I could have done it if I was using the right equipment. So it didn't really take an incredibly talented gunman to do what the guy did.
It was not a gun. I believe the theory, because when I saw the moment he was shot, like his t-shirt blow up like that, it went against everything I knew about firearm and the projectile and the bullets. I have some knowledge, I have some experience, believe me.
Okay.
It went against it. I thought, oh, maybe I learned something new. Oh, maybe the bullet, the force will actually bring the t-shirt because it's light up like that. But then I was exposed to a different theory. Then I was like, I was right. Bullet would not have caused that. It was the thing, the mic thing he was wearing here that blew up, or there's some little projectile from there that went into his set. That explains two things. Number one, the dynamic, the shirt shouldn't blow like that if it was a bullet. Number two, the big slug, that's some gauge knife, something. It's used to kill moose. But it did not penetrate did not go through his neck. It was supposedly stopped by his spine, based according to the surgeon that did the autopsy. It didn't go through. So I mean, it's just ridiculous if you believe that it's a bullet, like that kind of gauge or that kind of.
Well, has there been ballistic reports about T-shirt?
It was not that investigation was stopped, right? That's the whole thing we're going on.
The investigation has been stopped.
Yeah, but
I mean, you don't need to stop an investigation to test whether or not shooting.
If you don't have investigation, if you're not an official investigator, how do you test? Who's going to test? It's gone. All the evidence, the scene, everything it's gone. Otherwise, if there's an investigation, if you dispose that thing, you're tempering the evidence. It's a crime. But if there's no such case, it's stopped by the government. Does everybody your theory against mine?
So the Charlie Kirk investigation has stopped?
Yeah. Look at that guy Ken. Was it Joe Ken or something?
Joe Kent. Yeah.
Yeah. Recall, not long ago, in southern Lebanon, the Hezbollah, loads of people were killed by pagers. Right?
That was Israel, and we know that was Mossad. Yes.
That's not like I'm just trying to pointing out that I don't know which organization. It's not high tech. Anybody can use that, right? I'm just saying that kind of technology is available.
So you're
That's all I'm saying.
Like the phone in my purse right now can blow up and.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It can blow up in different ways. It can have a little projectile going from that thing into your neck. We're not talking about 10 feet, 20 feet. We're not talking about a few inches. That's doable.
You know, there are different segments to this, and one of them is the actual practicality or viability of what we're being asked to accept happened. And I think I'd feel a lot better about that if the prosecution case against this guy was going ahead. I've got an awful feeling that somehow he's never going to come to trial.
Are you saying Jack Ruby exists and that
No,
Give me a date. Let me put this on the calendar.
No, I'm
But
listening.
the point is, you know, everything about it, there are all these highly suspicious circumstances.
About the gun too.
Right, the whole thing with the
And
gun.
him
But I mean,
changing
the
his
point
shirt
is,
and-
you know,
Right.
maybe there are answers to some of these things.
It's
But,
going to be obfuscated. It's going to
but
be.
you know, what are they waiting for? And also there is the fact that Joe Kent, who was head of the counter-terrorism department, was told he couldn't investigate it. He wanted to investigate it, and he was told, no, you can't. Why?
Well, from what I gather,
I
it
don't
says
know what the
because
reason
it's because I guess Utah has the jurisdiction. That's
But-
what
but-
I'm reading. I've not read anything. I mean, certainly they're still investigating it, right?
That's
There's going to be a
ridiculous.
trial, so it's not like the prosecution, the government's saying that we can't prosecute anymore. So that's kind of not accurate what you're saying. This one guy says he was stopped from not investigating. It's
He
not
was
like
head
they
of
stopped.
He was head of counter-terrorism in the United
He's not
States,
just any
and he
guy.
was stopped from investigating
From who?
it.
By who?
By his, well, he went to his superior, who was Tulsi
Cash
Gabbard,
Patel.
and so on.
And you know this for a fact, like he's telling the truth.
You
use
think
your
he's making
judgment.
it up?
We don't know who's
He
telling
could
the
be.
truth.
You
I
think
mean,
he
the only
could
thing
he
that
could
I've ever,
be
I mean,
making it up.
the only thing
He
that
could be
comes
making
up
it up.
is
Come on.
he's
He
the
could-
only source for his from that I can find is he's the only source of the claim that he was stopped from doing it. Is there been any corroborating?
What better
people?
source could there be? He was head of counter-terrorism for the United States. Do you understand what that means?
That means he's not incapable of
He doesn't
dishonesty.
say he was.
Got it.
He doesn't say he was stopped
That's
unless.
a legitimate question. But do you have a better judgment than that? Do you have a better source or more evidence?
I'm asking you guys.
Well, I already given
the
an
only
answer.
thing that
Well,
I found
no, I'm
from
asking
news
you.
organizations
No, I'm
is
asking you. We're judging from what we know, based on our own judgment and based on what we know, right? Now you ask questions, try to poke holes, and we try to defend that line of thought. Okay, that's done. That's great. I applaud your questions. Now it's your turn.
okay.
Do you
I
have
don't know.
Do you have a source? What is your alternative theory? Do you?
I don't have an alternative theory.
Okay, that's
I
fine, that's fine.
I have only so much amount of time in life. So
That's fine, that's
I will
fine.
let the prosecutors and the defense figure it out. But I am certainly convinced it's not Israel.
Why?
Well,
Why would you be
Yeah,
convinced?
there you go. With your limited
Why would
amount
you
of
be
time.
convinced?
I did-
Because
Without
it's just
the things
Because
you
they don't
come
conduct
to that.
assassinations, right? They've never been known to conduct assassinations.
That's awesome.
I mean,
Largest-
Israel,
No,
wait,
the
wait,
last,
wait, so-
the
so
last
let me-
people in the world who
Let
have
me
conducted
try to
assassinations.
steel man, because like that's not a that. I don't think that's a reasonable position to be convinced that they didn't do it.
Because why would they?
Time
Because
out, time out.
all right,
Wait,
guys,
time out,
let's
time out.
all right,
No,
let's
let
go
him
in there.
spin. We
Let's
already
do
are.
it. All right, guys,
Let's
this pipsqueak on college campuses is really triggering the libtards, and he's gonna come for us. So we got to take him out.
Again,
You're
straw
right.
man,
Is that a
man.
straw man?
It is a straw man.
It's
It's a
totally
straw man.
misrepresented.
Because if that was that would have to be
Hey,
what would
hey,
have happened.
Lower your voice by several
Sorry,
decibels.
sorry.
We're going to have complaints from
Yes,
the
I'm
neighbors.
sorry.
Okay.
Forgive me.
The point is this: that he was not a pipsqueak. He was a very powerful force. He was something that Charlie Kirk had built an organization that was bringing in
Pro-Israel. For a
it
large chunk of
was
its
not
existence.
pro-Israel, except in the sense that all Republicans by default would be pro. I mean, Megyn Kelly is pro-Israel, but she is now being turned against that by all these people attacking her, just because she says that Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens should be heard.
Charlie
Right.
Kirk was going to be president one day.
Yeah, I mean,
That's-
I think he was a good candidate to be president. But the point is this, that you have this organization which does something unthinkable. It gets thousands upon thousands of young people, dedicated supporters of conservatism, of the free market and things like that, then the person who is responsible for that and leads it starts saying to his associates and friends, we should be returning this money that is coming to us from Zionist donors because we shouldn't be beholden to Israel. Now, is it in the interest of Israel to wipe him out? Yes, but nothing could be clearer. Now, it doesn't mean I'm saying they did it, but there are all kinds of different Zionist groups, and we know from the Epstein files that the left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing. Right. There's all kinds of organizations all over the place in this rotten, corrupt political system where, you know, that people can do things. Now, I'm sure that Zionists get up to all kinds of tricks. And certainly Israel is constantly conducts assassinations. But the thing is, it can all be plausibly denied. I mean, there are this group and that group, and you know, who can prove that that Epstein was working with Mossad? Who can prove that? But obviously, Mossad didn't object to what he was doing, and occasionally facilitated it. That much is beyond question. Right. You know, I mean, what Candace has always said is we don't know who did this. We do know there are all kinds of holes in the official story that this trans guy did it. But maybe that will all be settled when he comes to trial, if he ever does come to trial.
But what I did learn...
Wait, hold on, real quick. The original point that I was going to make was, it's not a reasonable position to be convinced that Israel didn't do it. The better position is that you're not convinced that they did.
Right, and I think
that is fair.
That's most people.
That's fair.
That's most people's view.
Right?
That's my view. I'm not convinced that they did.
Yeah, I'm agnostic on the question. If it turned out they did it, I'd be like, well, the motive was there in spades, right? Right. But like, am I convinced that they did it?
Couldn't I just take everything that Dave just said and like substitute Zionist for trans and be like, well, Charlie's real popular. He's turning, you know, people. He's speaking out against trans, and he's, you know, very powerful. And like, I mean, don't pro-trans people have an interest in squashing that? You know, couldn't you just make the same argument?
Not
yes. Except that it's absolutely beyond question that any Republican youth group, right-wing youth group, is not going to be pro-trans. That's, you know, that's settled. There's no. Whereas in the case of you've actually got the leading figure saying we should consider returning donations from Zionists. That opens up the possibility that this powerful organization, powerful at recruiting tomorrow's voters on the Republican side, that this powerful figure is going to make a big difference. He's going to turn what could have been a Zionist organization into an anti-Zionist organization. And by the way, this is all part of something which, if you were Mossad or someone like that, you would be noticing. There are quite respectable politicians who are now saying, I will not accept any money from AIPAC or any Zionist organization. If I get the donations, I will return them. That is happening. It's a groundswell.
It makes more sense to kill those, to take those people out too, because they're politicians and they actually make policy.
This is now baked in. It's going to become a liability. It's going to become a liability to be someone who's paid by the Zionists.
Taking money from lobbyists and who took money from AIPAC.
Maybe geopolitical forum will take some money from AIPAC. I need money. The consequences, I'll deal with it later.
Yeah, that's funny.
I don't want to hire a real cameraman instead of this thing. This sucker, you know. That's good. It makes do. I mean, it makes do. But I'd rather have a real, you know.
I don't really have that much more to add on this particular topic. It's just, you know,
a ton of money against him.
I mean,
I haven't really followed it. It's not like I have not watched, I think, a single trying to think. I don't know that I've watched even a single Candace Owens episode talking about the Charlie Kirk assassination. If I did, it was like in the immediate aftermath, you know.
Well, she hasn't done much talking about the assassination itself. She's done a lot talking about the Erica and a lot about
Yeah, that's
Erica.
a lot of
I
fun.
think it's hilarious, a lot of it, and the whole fact that unsuspectedly this person who presented herself to Charlie Kirk and eventually married him as a Christian virgin was actually banging everybody in sight. And was
Oh no!
Was she really?
yes.
How do we know this?
We know this from Candace's shows.
How does Candace know this?
Because she's
She's
got
an investigator.
the receipts.
Does she? Have you
She
seen
has
them?
the receipts. Come on.
I've not seen the receipts.
I like her
Well, that's
report
because you
on
haven't
Um,
Something that I just
And I'm
learned-
sure Justin's been looking for him.
Yeah.
There's just something I learned parenthetically from Charlie Kirk's death, and that was that I'm not experienced with guns. I have really bad hand-eye coordination, but there are machines out there that I could kill someone from 300 or 500 feet if I have the right equipment, or in the machines do what they're designed to do. I could do some incredible shots. I guess there's some equipment out there, if I don't know, walked on top
There's a
of
scope. There's scope.
if it's designed
If you're in a prone position, a scope, nothing's rushing you, nothing is moving you. You're very stable on the ground, on your stomach. It's doable.
and it doesn't take an incredible talent, or I
No.
wasn't a marksman in the military.
I guess
Marines or anything.
basic. It's basic. You don't have to incredible talent, but of course you can't be like, oh, I don't like guns. I shake when I'm with guns. Then you can make it.
You know, I've
The
thought
scope, the hair, what's it called? The hairs in the scope is so big. It was just like there. It was like your second button or third button. I mean, it's very powerful, and you just pull the trigger slowly. Make sure you're not moving the gun when you're pulling the trigger, like smoothly, and then boom.
a thought experiment that I think is kind of fun and funny to think about is, imagine before the whole pagers and cell phones thing in Lebanon or whatever happened. Imagine, I don't know, let's say a month prior to that. You said, you know what I think the Israelis are going to do? I think they're going to blow up people with pagers and cell phones. They'd look at you and they'd be like, what?
Right.
Do the Jews control the weather too? Like, are you... This is just off the wall, nutso conspiracy shit, and that's what it would have sounded like ahead of time. But then we find out, holy crap, however long it took them to like get into the supply chains to put the components in,
Right.
to have
ship it to
exploding
you.
pagers and cell phones. It's like, oh, that's something that they did, right?
Yeah.
But you would have totally come off as a complete lunatic.
That's
if you
why
said,
it was effective, because it was
you'd be like, what's that meme of the guy with the red strings and the corkboard, with the big bug eyes, like, the Jews, the Israelis, they're gonna like totally blow up people's cell phones and pagers in Lebanon. Like, you'd come off like
They purposely used pagers instead of cell phone because cell phone has security issues. Pagers didn't.
Yeah. And I like 60 Minutes, and 60 Minutes actually did a large part of my technology reporting is 60 Minutes, so they did a good story on the pagers.
They interviewed one of the Mossad guys. Is that the episode you're talking about?
I believe so, yes.
Yeah, it was the guy, of course, his face was blacked out and everything. But he said they'd had that plan ready to go for quite a while, and they decided this was the time to use it.
Because you
One
have
of the
to.
reasons they thought is they thought people might know about it and use it or lose it kind of thing.
it literally.
That thing you can only use it once.
Yeah.
Imagine, right?
Yeah.
So you have to find the best time, the most impact, use it, because you only have one shot. Next time it's not going to work. No one's going to wear pager from that point on.
It just feels like one of those, like literally one of those cartoon things where it's like the thing blows up and the half of your head is black with your hair sticking straight up, because like the
Yeah.
the comedy
Warner
aspect
Brothers,
of it, like You know, like
But
you pick
Israel
up the
is
phone,
excellent
you know,
at-
the cartoon character doesn't know that the fuse is lit, and you know, hello, you
I
know.
thought I was the only one remembering those.
Yeah.
I'm so old, and you're so young. You can't have.
I'm old enough that I
What,
saw
Looney
some of those
Tunes?
things, like Looney Tunes,
Looney Tunes
or
was
like
on,
Tom and
like,
Jerry.
it's
any
only
of
been
those.
within, like, 10 or 15 years that Looney Tunes has,
Really?
like, kind of
Okay.
disappeared off
I
TV.
haven't watched TV in a while. I lost
mean,
the sense.
It was cheap to syndicate. That's why it was on TV, like, every day, probably, for ever.
So why did we get pulled into a war with Iran?
Because it serves
Trump
U.S.
wants to
purpose
do it and he doesn't
to
have to.
contain China, and also serves Israel's purpose to contain Iran or even regime change.
I think
Iran.
we
So
can
support- to
say. I think we
support our
can say with
51st
certainty.
state.
Oh,
Huh?
pretty,
Was
I'm
that-
pretty certain
was that
that we would not. Trump would not have made the decision if he'd known what the actual outcome would be.
yeah, of course.
Um,
But he had the
so
motivation.
he had people screaming in his ear.
Who? Who was that screaming in his ear? Who's giving orders to Trump?
You know, all
The Zionists,
all
the
the
neocons.
neocons. Whereas Charlie Kirk was screaming in his ear not to do
not
it.
to do it for 2 days, according to my bubble.
But the thing is, there was a group of people who kept telling him it would, you know, and I think he was probably emotionally emboldened by the success of the Venezuela operation.
Yeah, he was on the
And he
roll.
thought, and in his
on the
mind,
roll.
you know, Iran is just like Venezuela.
That's just so idiotic
His knowledge
thing to
of
say.
geography and social science is about on that level. You know, oh, Venezuela, Iran, okay. Well, you know, I think it's clear that from his point of view, whether he recognises it now or not, it was a big mistake. However, I think the immediate cause of that big mistake was a lot of people screaming in his ear, "You've got to do it! You've got to do it! You've got to do it!" And he also had people screaming in his ear from time to time, "Don't do it! Don't do it! Don't do it!" One of whom was Charlie Kirk, and he made the decision because he thought that Witkoff and what's his name? What's his son? Kushner. They were the greatest experts on geopolitics in the history of the world, and so of course he had to do what they told him. I hope. Well, I mean, I was going to say I hope he's learned his lesson, but the fact is that Donald Trump is now toast. He's completely. He has no future because the war is only getting worse and worse and worse for him, and you know, and the world economy is going to take a big pasting. If it was to stop right now, which cannot happen for various reasons, but if it was to stop right now, then we'd still have something bigger than 2008. But with every week that goes by, we're heading to something that's the worst thing since the 1930s.
Parenthetically, there were some insider trades that happened
I heard about that.
beautifully, gorgeously timed.
Yeah.
And they just happened, surprisingly, to make some money off of this deal.
Yeah.
There were some very well-timed insider trades.
That's one of the things that Nick Fuentes was talking about is you know, all his, like, you know the timing of, like, you know, it's on a Friday after the market's closed where he issues his 48-hour warning, and then and then he lets it go. He doesn't pull the trigger on the devastation or whatever it was, whatever this recent thing. It was 24 or 48 hours or whatever. And then, you know, he was saying, like, you know, this could easily be just market manipulation because he pays very close attention. You know, like, oh, what are the markets doing? And the market's going to go down and you know, and his whole psychological persuasion thing to soothe the markets and all that kind of stuff. I think that possibility cannot be discounted at all.
But however, you've got to keep a sense of proportion here. The fact that he might have been very clever at manipulating the markets in order to manipulate public opinion for a week doesn't alter the fact that it's absolutely clear he made a terrific blunder.
Oh, sure,
and that he wouldn't have started the war if he had not made that terrific blunder, and that the circumstances are such that it's just going to get worse and worse from here on out. And, you know, Trump is not going to say, while Tel Aviv is being bombed every day, we've won and we can leave. And that's the situation now. Iran is hitting Tel Aviv and Haifa every day with big, newly designed rockets. I mean, it's almost too good to be true. Newly designed rockets that were way ahead of anything the West has.
I want some like defense
And
minister.
they just hit the oil thing in Israel.
I'll get to you in a second. I just want some defense minister in whatever the Iranian or Persian accent is, you know. And the rockets we are using, they are the best rockets. Nobody has rockets like ours. They're the fastest rockets. Like it's a tragedy of like gargantuan proportions I can't wrap my head around. But that kind of dark humor would just make me laugh. Yeah, Ernie.
Yeah, just a quick comment before I ask. I have a question for David. Is in addition he's called the British aircraft carriers toys, which I think is you know, that's one of his better anti-ally statements that he's ever made. He's made a lot of them.
Yeah.
David,
What did he say?
you some time ago said
He called the British carriers like toys or
he called
something.
them toys. Okay, he said toys. We don't even. That's okay. Don't send them their toys. You know, compared to ours. You said that Iran could, at any time they wanted, could destroy Israel.
Mm-hmm.
Now, considering what's happened, would you modify that at all? How would you modify it? Would you push the time frame out? Where do you think these things will be? I don't see Israel's necessarily going to defeat Iran.
Well, they're being
I don't
defeated
see
right
Iran
now.
defeating Israel. So I want to hear your comments on
Well,
that.
I mean, look, Iran is taking into account everything, including the existence of the United States.
Yes.
So, I mean, they could just destroy Israel in a day. But however, to do that would inflict a lot of damage on Palestinians, which they probably don't want to do. But they are hitting Israel hard every day.
That's true.
And as far as we know, they can keep that up forever.
Yeah.
And they, you know, they have this habit of using their obsolete rockets first and then the more advanced rockets. Mm-hmm. And I always thought this was just a kind of charming habit. But I recently read that these solid fuel rockets, they don't keep perfectly. In other words, after a while on the shelf, they lose their effectiveness a bit. So there is an incentive to use things up that have been hanging around for a while. But anyway, no. If it was just in the world, Iran versus Israel, nobody else would intervene, including the United States. They could polish off Israel. There's no question. And they have boots on the ground already. They have Hezbollah and Hamas. Yeah. They are the boots on the ground for Iran in Israel, in occupied Palestine, I should say. So, so I think that, you know, Iran is now taking the position, we will fight on until our demands are met. And our minimal demands are all US bases withdrawn from the Middle East and payment of reparations to us for all the death and destruction you've caused, which must now be in the trillions of dollars. Yeah. So Trump's in this position. He's got to do something dramatic to hit Iran, and I maintain there is no such opportunity. If he puts ground troops in, this will just make things I think you should.
Nobody wants to sacrifice their kid to be on.
When he puts ground troops into a definite operation, you might as well contact the next of kin right away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's
don't wait. They're dead already. Iran knows what it's doing, I can't see Trump saying at this point, or even a month from now, yeah, we agree to withdraw all American bases in the Middle East, and we agree to pay 50 trillion or whatever it by that time is to Iran for all the damage we've caused, and we humbly apologize too. I can't see this happening. So given that, what is Trump going to do? His instinct is to find something that can be represented as a win for the United States. But there is no such thing on the horizon. There is nothing.
Straits of Hormuz. If
Well-
I can get you to open the Straits of Hormuz, look, everybody, I
But
won.
they can't do that. I mean, that's ridiculous. And if they try, they will be slaughtered. And of course, it's going to get worse because the Houthis are going to attack the Red Sea. So that's going to be one alternative to the Strait of Hormuz that isn't going to be there. So, I think basically Iran has won the war. And the question is, how, I think it's highly likely, I don't say it's certain, but it's highly likely that Trump will stand down, will resign at some point in the near future.
Or impeached.
Parenthetically, I don't think he's that healthy.
That's
and
right.
I don't know how long he has to live. He's an old man. He's really fat and
Yeah, he's
bless his
overweight.
heart.
He's overweight, yeah.
and
How many dead
It's all the coke
Americans
at
and how many
McDonald's.
sunken ships will it take
I wouldn't say he
to get
was that
America to
old.
withdraw?
Say that again, Ernie?
How many dead Americans and how many sunken American ships will it take to get Trump or an American leader to withdraw?
he doesn't give a shit. I'm sorry.
Well,
but
you
he
may be
doesn't.
right,
That's
but
true.
that's